Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're working in a workshop-style format to facilitate discussion. We have 3 items on our agenda. Consideration of awarding a bid for the 24-25 beach nourishment project. The work that we have on the UDO, and then a discussion on strategic planning. So Catherine, I'm going to pass this to you.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome on this rainy day. We're going to start right into our Moffatt and Nichol memo that each of you should have at your place. This bid for our beach nourishment sand project, the dredging RFP was opened on Tuesday, and Moffatt and Nichol has gone through and presented this memo, which is a summary of what occurred. As the mayor said Tuesday night, wasn't the news that we were hoping for. And there's a whole lot of numbers on that spreadsheet. I will try to bottom line it for you in that they were excessively over our budget ability for this year. The option for bidding for next year was included in the RFP. So officially, we received 2 different dredging companies that did bid. And the only possibility that seems close is the winning bid for next year. You will see on the chart on the first page, if you look down at the very bottom, the row called bid B and the column entitled WMI. That's the vendor name. Their base bid B is kind of right in the middle of that chart, is $39 million. That was still over our budget. But that's at least a more workable number that we would hopefully not have to engage alternate B1 and B2 and maybe not even B3. And again, in summary fashion, alternate 1B is referring to the East Beach, the Wilmington Harbor project that the Corps is doing that was also bid out on that same day. So we would not need to hopefully elect to do 1B. 2B is Lockwood Folly on the west end. We also anticipate that moving forward without having to be engaged in this bid. So, and B3 is additional post and rope work, which we could negotiate because that could be done partially in-house, if not all in-house. So basically, we will not be able to do the project this year. Those numbers you can see at the top in base bid A for both of them were $80+ million. That's double our budget.
This is for our $40 million beach removal?
Our sand, yes, sir. This is the whole big project we've been working on. Came down to, we met all of the hoops, all of the state and federal requirements. We're still waiting for the final sign-off on the BOEM lease, but that's anticipated to come without any further concerns. And then it came down to the bidding, and the dredging companies are clearly not available this year.
At least not at reasonable cost.
So even with the bone fighting for the permits and everything, all that's moot at this point?
That's not
Well, the
moot.
good thing is it carries us for several years. So we still needed it. So it's a good thing we feel secure in that we are going to get it. We won't completely rest until we see the final sign off, but that doesn't appear to be of concern. We'll get that, and then we'll have an opportunity to do this project hopefully next year. So Moffatt and Nichols has done a good job outlining our outstanding options on page 2. They suggest we could negotiate with the winning bidder, given that it is over our publicly declared ability. That gives us the opportunity to either not accept any of the bids or negotiate with the lowest bidder. And then the other option would be completely rebid the project, again, sometime in the spring. And I just got off the phone with Caswell Beach, and I talked to Beth from Moffett Nichols as well this morning, and the same thing happened to them, the Army Corps project that was also bid out on Tuesday. And they are anticipating they will rebid in March. So that is an option for us as well, to do the same thing and rebid to coincide with theirs.
For the same reason, because mobilization costs are just astronomically high. So we could look at this as a glass half empty situation or a glass half full. I prefer the latter. What this does is we were really on a fast track and trying to literally thread a needle, getting all the permissions, et cetera, through and to get the bids in. It's neither been easy nor, I mean, it's with a big imposition of effort and time on the part of staff. I look at this as an opportunity to give us a longer runway to prepare for the nourishment that we're anticipating and would encourage us to rebid. Just as an example, there might be some other revenue streams that we can tap. We're going to have to do that anyway, and would encourage us all to do that. With the first option, I think, would be to go to the county. There, in other counties, the 1 cent of the accommodations tax that goes to tourism, many of the county governments give that 1 cent back to the municipality. So just that would be the first place that I would start, is seeing if we can affect that here. But with county developments, you have roughly, I think the number is somewhere in the 79,000 range for additional populations in the next 4 to 5 years. That all has impact on our beach. So there might be another opportunity to find some revenue streams that comport with that data point. But I think it's opportunity to get creative. And there's a lot of conjecture behind why the mobilization costs are as high as they are, but it really is conjecture at this point. You know, do they have a full calendar and we're trying to recoup costs for coming here, for instance? They would have to pay whatever penalty where those are, whoever they would be moving from to us. It could be they're moving from a long distance. One of these I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's not Weeks. It's Great Lakes is an international company, and very well what we need, the dredges could be out of the country. So again, it's all conjecture, but it still leads us to where we are. And Catherine and I have already begun to think and strategize about additional revenue streams that even if this decision had been favorable, I think we would still need to continue to find additional revenue sources. And this is yet another situation that coincides with the session I'm participating in Monday or on Tuesday in the NC Byway meeting. Yeah, this is not unique to Oak Island.
Catherine, walk me through something. The 20 million we got from the state, what's our time period on having to spend that?
Yeah, because of the way it was designated to us, it was in the state budget. It was not a grant fund. So Moffett Nichols has reached out to Kevin Hart, I think Lisa has as well, and we are targeting to meet with him at the Byways next week to find out if he has any concerns or needs a letter from us. But given this is the reason, it's not for our inaction, I don't foresee that being a problem.
And the fact that we're going to back it up probably a year,
Yeah.
that means we'll have an additional year
of accommodation tax.
That's correct. Mhm.
So if the price is more, we'll have another $5 million possibly
That's correct.
next year to put toward that.
Will help.
So, thinking about potential impacts of waiting a year, we have a project with a defined scope based on as close to existing conditions, I would assume, as they can get. We bid this in March. We have the project set up. We very unfortunately get slammed with a major storm in June. What does a scenario like that do to the project where the scope that we have now may no longer be valid?
So, two things. One, they always do a pre-construction survey. And fortunately, we did not have that done yet, so we saved that money. So we can do that pre-survey closer to when that time occurs. But to your point, there may be additional cubic yards of sand required, and that would just cost more. The way they did the bidding, it's based on the cost per, well, mobilization is one, but then the cost per cubic yard. And we could use those bids at that sand price and just require more sand.
How does this affect us on Army Corps of Engineer coming in here a couple of months ago and saying when they do the dredging, they're going to give us millions of cubic yards of
That's right.
sand at such a discount?
So that was the bid that also occurred that day, done by the Corps for the Wilmington Harbor component. It was bid out here, that's what's listed as the alternates 1A and 1B. They bid on it for our project, knowing that we had hoped that it would come out of the Corps project on the Wilmington Harbor, so that $6 million that we had hoped to get sand there would be cheaper, so we would not need to pull this alternate price. But given the fact that theirs came in so expensive as well, and they're gonna have to rebid in March, we can stay on the exact same path that we hope theirs comes forward and ours goes forward without having to pay that component. We'll just pay what we were gonna do in between. Lockwood Folly goes forward, Wilmington Harbor goes forward, and we're just getting the sand for the in-between. But that's to be determined since they've just announced that they're gonna have to rebid in March.
So everybody's up in the air.
Everybody's having dredging problems. That's correct. It's not just us.
So the side cast dredge that we use for Lockwood Folly, that's a local dredge, I believe. That's something. So my only concern with this scenario is for the West End. And
And I haven't heard anything negative about their project not moving
we
forward.
might want to ask Bob about,
I think that one's gonna
yeah,
continue.
yeah.
So in January, February, and March, all of this time prior to the turtle season, we're not gonna be doing any sand work.
Nice. Not this year. It will be next year.
We'll
hopefully.
be praying for good weather and little erosion.
And it was not for a lack of trying.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Even, Moffett Nichols, thanks to Lisa, myself, even David Kelly, everybody has pushed this project full force as fast as we could possibly get it done. And it was a little disheartening that we worked so hard and got this close, and the bids just didn't come back favorably.
And when we do sand work a year from now, we know it's gonna cost more.
Well, that's why we included the option bid B down here, so that they're giving us a fixed cost now for what it would cost next year. So we can accept the low bidder and negotiate through that and try to lock in those prices for next year. You'll see at the very last paragraph, I believe, Moffett Nichols' recommendation, however, is to completely rebid it, because we do believe there might be other options in the future, other bids, other bidders.
Sand availability.
That's a gamble. Certainly just wanted to present that to you today, since it just happened Tuesday, and we have some time to think about this, and then,
Is Great Lakes, have we heard, are they 30% higher on all the other bids they've given to other locations?
are they higher than others received?
I mean, they're at 94 million and WMI is at 61 on the full package. So on, with the Army Corps and with other towns is,
They are clearly not able to do it this year, and they're more expensive for next year. We don't know the whys.
If we were buying a car, or if we were bidding on a building, you know, an add-on addition on the house, and you have a contractor come, he would overbid because he's either can't do the project now or prefers not to. So, something that reasonably, or unreasonably high, I think that's a message that they're just not in a position to do this job. Because Great Lakes has done this work for us before.
yeah.
So, sorry to start off with the kind of bad news, but as the mayor said, the good news is we'll be in a even better financial position a year from now.
So I apologize for being late. So maybe a 30-second
Yeah.
synopsis of what I missed. So April 2025 is out, clearly.
We will not be putting sand on the beach this winter.
Okay, for next year, though, the engineer estimate was 47 mil. WMI is 50% higher, 61 roughly, 40% higher. And Great Lakes is 100% higher. So is Moffitt's recommendation we just start the process again?
Correct.
And then see how many other potential vendors may raise their hand?
We can negotiate with the winning bidder or close this bid out and rebid it later in the spring for next year. Those are really our two options.
Is the Army Corps starting over or have we heard yet?
They're going to rebid in March. That is their recommendation right now.
And we'll have a chance to talk to them next week.
Yeah, so you don't have to make a decision now. We can discuss it and get back to Moffitt and Nichols after we've all had an opportunity to digest what happened. And I'll be looking at the finances and look at some other alternatives, and the mayor's suggestion to pursue other revenue streams is a good one.
Our current contract with Moffitt and Nichols, what are the performance metrics in there? We're currently in phase 3 or 3A or 3B or wherever we are. I'm fairly confident I recall that there's an end date to the current phase in that contract. So pushing this out another year means that, are we gonna have to do some sort of addendum or extension to the Moffitt-Nichol contract? And then are they gonna come back and say that there's more work, engineering work that they're gonna do for the upcoming year? Are they mandated to do more engineering work? I just don't wanna sit here and write another check to Moffitt-Nichol for a delayed year for a couple $1 million, you know, to keep them on retainer, right? So I'd really like to understand where we are with their contract, what performance metrics are in place, what options we have there, and what do our costs look like for this delayed year that we're gonna experience.
Anything else on that topic before we turn it over to the next topic? All right, so then we'll start the planning board recommendations for the table of uses, supplemental regulations, and definitions, the UDO. Before I turn it over to Matt, he and I have been strategizing a bit how to help organize today's meeting. Certainly can attack this a variety of ways. What we'd like to do is start with, Matt's going to give you a recap and introduction of where we are. We did receive some items from several different council members. Matt has compiled those, and we'll pass those out so everybody can see each other's. We'd like to stick to the definitions and the table of uses and go through that and identify, going through all of the concerns that we have heard and then opening the floor up to any additional concerns from other council members and seeing if we can arrive at some consensus on those, or at least identify the areas where we need to do more work for you. And then move to the supplemental regulations. I think having that framework might keep us organized throughout the day, because there's so much here, and there might be a lot of different concerns, and we want to make sure we hear all of them. But if that's okay with you, if we attack it that way, and then we will wrap it up with Matt summarizing our options and processes for moving forward from here today. Does that sound like a reasonable plan? And I'll be happy to write on the board and capture those parking lot issues, as well as what we understand might be some pain points that we need to do some more work on. Okay? All right, Matt.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to start off just real briefly apologizing for myself. I've been under the weather for the last few days, so please bear with me if I sound a little strange or, otherwise stumble over some words. Just bear with me, y'all. First of all, thanks everybody for coming and being willing to participate, and those that sent comments in before today's meeting. As you all know, the town staff and the planning board worked over a long period of time to recommend some updates to the table of uses, the definitions and supplemental regulations stemming from an audit of our Unified Development Ordinance that was performed by the Council of Governments. Just for a quick recall, last month we gave you a high-level review of those changes. Hopefully you've had a chance to take an in-depth look at the packet materials that you were provided. And so today, like Catherine mentioned, what we'd like to do is, if as a part of that review, you've run into questions or things you'd like explained further, let's review some of those. And if there's any conflicts, pain points, or anything like that that we need to deal with, let's get those documented. That being said, this is a workshop session. It's not the public hearing. We haven't even had the public hearing yet. It's not the action time. So I don't want anybody to feel like we're here to solve every problem today. That would come, we may identify something today that you think is problematic, and we have a public hearing, and all the public is in favor of it, and then you go, well, maybe I should, I hadn't thought about it that way. So I just don't want anybody to think that we have to, solve every issue today, but it would be good to, any issue that you have, go ahead and express it so that we can document it and go forward from there. I did receive a couple of responses from some council members. I've already spoke with Ms. Cartner, but Mr. Chulo, do you mind if I hand out copies of what you sent in as well?
Please
Okay,
do.
great. So this one is what Ms. Cartner sent in. Thank her for doing a very thorough review of our definitions. That was amazing, frankly. So that's the first item that's going around. The second item are comments and questions from Ms. Chulo as well. And then lastly, we did get a lot of good feedback and questions. The task that's before the town right now is related to, like I mentioned, that priority suggestion from the Council of Governments, which was to modernize the table of uses, make sure that everything had an applicable definition, and then at a later council meeting, review the supplemental regulations. So some of the stuff that was sent in doesn't necessarily relate to that, but once again, it's good to get those things out and make sure that we're documenting those for consideration. So what Catherine and I also worked on was reviewing those things that were sent in and trying to pinpoint the ones that didn't relate to the work that staff and the planning board did together. So we can try to focus on those, and then if there's, as you'll see in the other, when you compare this list and what was sent in, keep those other things in mind for our parking lot discussions as well, going forward. Once again, not to move them, but to keep them in our thoughts going forward. So the last thing I'll pass around is what we worked on compiling. Mr. Bach, who's not here today, also sent in a few things that we've added to this list at the very end of the second page. So if it's okay with council, I think a good mode for us to operate in is to go through the things that we've identified from what was sent in, try to work through those first, and then if there's additional questions, concerns, and points, we can kind of go around and deal with that. And like Catherine said, first maybe focus on, table of use definition questions, and then move into supplemental regulations questions as well. So that being said, on the handout that you have that says questions and items sent in prior to the meeting that relate directly to the planning board recommendation for review. Like I mentioned, Ms. Cartner sent in a very detailed review of the definition section of our ordinance. Several of them on that first page that we played out for you did relate directly to the planning board, and staff working on through that. So we can go through these one by one and just give general feedback. Like I said, we don't have to solve anything today. In fact, in order to actually change the planning board recommendation, that would happen after action after the public hearing. So just keep that in mind as well. The first one was suggesting modifying the definition of automobile parking garages or parking lots independent, adding some additional details there as to the use, and specifically calling out some things that are not that use. Typically not a bad idea, just so you don't, just from my feedback, just so you don't have folks come in and try to claim that they're not X, they're Y. So if there's things you want to call out, definitely can be beneficial from an ordinance construction standpoint.
Where, it says page 3.
Handout.
Oh, but he's cross-referencing it with that. Page 3 of the definitions. It'll,
It coincides with the original packet that we got, and the definitions are pages 1 through 12.
I gotcha. So page 3, the
Page.
red line,
And then
52 and 53.
so it's page 25.
52 and 53 of the packet, sir.
52 and 53, but that specific document has its own page numbers.
It's just the way that the ordinance prints out when you print it. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So on page, what you call page 3, it's page
52.
52.
Yeah.
Okay.
52 of the packet, page 3 of
You're
the
there.
definitions. Okay. Are there any questions or anything related to that suggestion that we want to
Two or
discuss?
3 days ago, so we could have digested it before now.
It's not his fault. I didn't turn mine in until yesterday morning. I worked on it for days.
Having learned that, Matt, way to get this to us as quick as you could. I understand, but gosh, yeah, I'm trying to catch up.
Appreciate you. From the staff perspective, I'll just chime in and say that I wouldn't have any concern with Ms. Carter's suggestion for that definition.
So now, am I reading right now on this Bob's suggestions, or is this Terry's suggestions?
The definitions, questions, and recommendations section, all those came from Ms. Carter. What she sent over was focused on those definitions. So.
And is there a staff perspective? Are you suggesting that these,
I'll kind of go through them one by one with you on each of these suggestions that we've listed out. Well, like I said, the first one related to automobile parking garages and parking lots. I don't see any issue with that recommended definition as well. But certainly want to throw these out there, so if anybody has a question, you know, or something we need to discuss about it, we certainly can.
So this is independent parking garages. This is not car repair places.
No, and Ms. Gardner can speak to it a little bit more, but the last sentence in her suggested definition, I believe is intended to specifically say that those are not, you know, that repair places, storage for vehicles waiting repair is not.
Do we have parking garages now?
We do not have a parking garage. We do have an independent parking lot that St. James operates, I believe. Yes, sir. That would certainly fall into the definition of an independent parking lot. It's not associated with another use on the property or anything like that. It's strictly for
But
parking.
otherwise, we've disallowed that.
I believe it's still allowed in the CB as a permitted use under the current ordinance construction. Yes, ma'am.
So if someone were to have an empty lot,
They would have-
they could set up a parking lot and charge $4 an hour?
Under the current ordinance construction, yes, sir.
I thought we did away with that.
I'd have to double
With the
check, but
parking.
let me look at the table. Bear with me.
Regulations.
I thought we did too.
Hopefully I've got a table right here in front of me.
Maybe one hasn't caught up with the other, but when we talked about parking, we didn't want anyone competing with the town.
Right, when we did paid parking, we wanted to make sure people couldn't open up their property
Yeah.
What didn't get
for parking.
included.
It may have been limited to just parking season, but I know there was a restriction placed on.
I knew at
people
one
being
time,
able to
somebody down on Crowell
park
Street
cars.
and Ocean Drive had a vacant lot and was gonna put in a concrete parking. For-
No, we can put that on the parking lot, Matt. You don't have to find that
Okay.
right now.
Sorry, I should have
You
brought
wanna
my
write it up
laptop.
there?
So I could quickly search, but I'll triple check into that for you. But I believe what we did, and I can once again double check, is limit individual property owners from like renting their driveways out and things like that for parking. But I'll check the table one more time.
Because that can
to see
become
for sure.
crazy.
Yeah. But once again, back to the definition, no real issue with what's suggested here.
Good job. Gary.
All right,
I don't know yet.
We'd have businesses competing with one another.
yeah. Moving on to number 2 on that list. Apologize, let me get back to where I was in my packet here. Was brew pub definition. Once again, you can see in there a expansive definition for brew pub. Once again, staff doesn't have any issue with the recommended definition from Ms. Gardner on this.
I think the expanded definition gives us a lot more protections. I mean, it's very specific.
Other questions or comments or concerns with that?
Yeah, the brew pub on page 53 is pretty vague.
Yeah, I like that change.
Is I'm not much of a beer connoisseur, so is limiting to fermented malt beverages, does that create a problem for any of them? Like, would they not be permitted to serve another type of beverage under this definition?
Wouldn't think so, but
Where are we
If
again?
this includes whatever they're doing.
Page?
So this is-
And then
this
page
is
53.
more about producing the
Yeah,
product
that's
and
what I was
selling
hoping,
it.
Yeah.
So brew pubs frequently serve wine or hard seltzers or other, other beverages that they don't make.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that this was directly corresponding to the production of, not necessarily reselling another product, but this is specific to the production of a product.
So we have another definition or two in here, Matt, I can't remember how it's labeled, about other beverages that, other businesses that provide, that serve beverages, but I can't remember. Can't remember which letter it's sold to.
Yeah, we do have several. We have things like, we have a specific definition for bar, one for restaurant. As many people know, when you go to a restaurant, usually they serve alcoholic beverages as well. ABC store, things of that nature. A lot of times it does relate to the production and sale. You usually also look at like off-premise versus on-premise consumption. Off-premise is usually like an ABC store where you take it home. I think in looking at this definition, the fact that it includes accessory uses such as tasting rooms, restaurant, retail, demonstration areas. Certainly if it's a brew pub and it's selling and it's licensed obviously to sell other alcoholic beverages, I think that could be included in those other accessory uses such as that is laid out in this definition. So it would have to primarily be for brewing and consumption of that. But I don't think this, if that is their primary business, but they also, have a few bottles of wine for people that want a glass, I don't think this limits them from doing
This
that.
doesn't have an adverse effect on our existing restaurants.
Oh, no, sir. Restaurants.
Conway, Shagger Jack,
No.
selling beer, selling wine.
No,
No, sir.
that's under bar.
Yeah. And restaurants in and of themselves, as long as they're licensed appropriately, sell alcohol, so that's.
Or a place like Solar Brewing that manufactures their own.
Yeah, they probably fall under brew pub under this definition, yes, sir.
And how
But
does
it wouldn't
this affect them?
I don't know their operations personally, I've never been in there. but-
I'm like Mark, I'm not.
Food and
Yeah.
they produce.
Yeah, so restaurants in here, tasting rooms, et cetera, is in here, so.
It actually defines what they do. That's
But it
pretty
doesn't
accurate.
restrict.
It's pretty accurate, no.
I don't think it would restrict any normal operation of
No, this is
a
good,
brew
that's a
pub.
good deal.
Unless you develop ordinances for brew pubs, we wouldn't have any impact. I'm looking at bar on top of 53 or near the top of 53. Would Grape and Ale be a retail outlet or a bar? Would it be a store or a bar?
That's an interesting example for
Because
sure.
this doesn't, here you could call them a bar, but I wouldn't
No,
call them a bar.
and they've typically fallen under more of a retail category for sure, in my opinion. I
But
know
they have
that-
an ABC license. So I think we need to look at this one as well.
Well, and one doesn't preclude the other, right? You can have two uses within one business, as long as you meet all the requirements and regulations
Okay.
for those individual uses. I know that when there were, a year or so ago at least, we asked them to apply for, or to submit some information for their outside seating area specifically. And what we did there was delineate the uses. So where there was a bar, we counted that square footage towards the bar category, and where it was, more of like the bottle shop side of it. So we broke it down like that for them. So like I said, one doesn't necessarily preclude the other. You don't have to just be one or the other as long as everything is permitted and you meet the regulations for all.
What
those
could get
uses.
dicey is parking.
Yes,
If it's called a store versus it's called a bar,
yes, ma'am.
would impact. So I would hope that we could delineate that and put
And-
grape and ale, something like grape and ale, in one category or the other.
And and without getting too far into the weeds, we look at that when someone comes in for a permit, right? So let's say you've got a part of your business that's dedicated to retail sale and the other half of the floor is dedicated to like a bar on-premise type of setup. When you submit your permit information, we ask you to split those floor areas out so we can come up with an appropriate parking calculation. So like if you're half bar, half retail, okay, well, we're gonna look at the square footage of the retail section and apply the retail calculation for that section. And for the bar section, we're gonna look at that section, the square footage there, and apply that calculation there as well. So we do already, for parking especially, we do already split those up internally as part of our review. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to note that what that precludes them from a major renovation to their building, because they probably could never meet the parking requirements. And that's a challenge. That's not supporting our local businesses.
But that applies to everybody. It
Yeah.
applies to any business. I mean, they gotta meet the parking requirements.
And it's something that we need to consider going forward. I don't want to try to solve
Sure,
that problem
yeah.
here, but
I'm in agreement with that.
I'll throw out one last thing associated with that.
They don't have enough parking, they use the other parking.
Where is it?
You should have filled up instead of out.
Like, for example,
Uh,
Matt, Salt 64, well-established restaurant, everybody likes it. They're so crowded, they use Hippie Chick and that other parking lot with permission and all. I hope they're in compliance.
They wouldn't have been able to open without being in compliance to the minimum parking requirements. A challenge that parking always has, right, is we set minimum requirements in the ordinance, and you're required to meet those minimums. A successful business, you know, it is a lot of times gonna exceed the capacity if you're at the minimum, and that's just a challenge with anything.
But our limitations aren't so stringent that,
Not to my knowledge, no, sir. But,
like Fixins uses the vacant lot across the street. Because for their good fortune, they're busy.
one, just tying back into one thing, one of the update priorities that the COG recommended was to evaluate the parking requirements within the CB Community Business Zoning District, which is those businesses. And I think to get it, the effect that you guys were mentioning. So this definitely, as you mentioned, it affects a lot of businesses along there. So definitely might be something that if prioritizing future work, could be something for us to look at as well.
can we capture that?
We have a parking problem, yes.
Absolutely.
Well,
I would hate to
Parking lot.
go around telling everybody we're trying to be a softer, gentler town and we're business friendly. And then we make rules that tell businesses, you're not welcome here because we've got a loophole to run you out.
Yes, sir.
We need to be business friendly.
Yes, sir. I agree.
There's, yeah, there's always a way to tell somebody they're not in compliance, but we need to find ways to tell everybody they are in compliance. Fixins has a nice little restaurant, but very little parking. And same with Salt 64.
But they're not prohibited from doing business because they do meet the minimums.
Yeah, and we, there are currently quite a few options that apply to the CB zoning district that, that help facilitate business operation on CB when it comes to parking, because it is obvious that,
Well, you have a hard job. I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm just
no,
saying.
I don't think you are either.
I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I
It's a pertinent
appreciate,
issue.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate you. You do your job a whole lot better than I could do your job. But I just want to play devil's advocate because I
That's
don't want
good
it to come
discussion.
up for those people.
carry on.
Okay.
Number 3.
Number 3, suggest modifying the definition of colleges, universities, and community colleges. Once again, a very detailed definition, including language for
Hand up.
community college, for associates, for significant certificates of completion. I don't have, once again, staff doesn't have any issue with, I don't see any concern with the suggested definition from Mrs. Carter on this as well.
Matt, is technical fields limiting? I'm not sure what you mean by technical.
Mm.
There might be other certificates that would enhance someone's ability to apply for a job or a promotion that may not be considered technical. So do we need a such as, do we,
Well, it doesn't, the sentence doesn't say shall, it said this may include.
okay,
So I think
Good
that's,
point.
that seems pretty open.
got it.
And we could, we could possibly change it to say completion in business, technical, or workforce skills, or something.
Trades.
Workforce trades, workforce skills, something like that, to make it a little more broad.
If you want to parking lot that. Please.
Yeah, 3.
I mean, it could be customer service. That's not a technical field per se. Or leadership. Thank you, Catherine.
Item number 4 asks, this is a general question, should the definition of hotel, motel include residential motels such as suite hotels? I'd open that up to the floor for discussion. The definition that was proposed does have something to say about on a per-room basis, but in my limited travels, I think even if you get a suite, that's rented as one room. So I think our definition that's in here covers that, but certainly if there's other viewpoints, I'd be happy to hear those as well.
I have an example. What is a residential motel such as a suite hotel? What might that be?
Well, they're taking over the market pretty much. You rent a, everybody has them. I can't think of a specific name right now. But you get a little living room with a little kitchenette, and there's a bedroom and a bathroom.
Not just your basic hotel
Not
room.
just your hotel room with 2 double beds and a bathroom.
And you're permitted to rent these for extended periods of time.
Yeah, like an
People-
extended
day or week
stay.
a month.
People
Yeah,
will-
extended
Residence, yeah.
stay.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah.
residence inn?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, I couldn't, the name
Very,
wouldn't come
very
to my
common
mind.
with more and more people doing contract type work, and they have to go to another area for that work. They'll just, instead of looking for a 6-month apartment, they'll just rent a 6-month lease on a resident.
Has a
Yeah.
kitchenette, has a kitchenette.
Right, has a little
meeting
kitchenette, a
room.
living room, right, yeah, so.
Does our current definition, would that account for that, or do we think we need to add something?
That's what I'm reading
I
now.
mean, it's-
Yeah, well, I think that's what Matt was saying. He feels like it's covered under room for rent, or however it was worded. My only question would be, do we have any restrictions around, like, duration of occupying
It
that
took me a little
room
bit to figure out, but
under
I
a
got it
single
now.
rental? Like, if someone needed a room for 3 months in a suite type environment, there's no restrictions that would prohibit someone from
No.
satisfying that lease agreement.
No, so the definition, as it's proposed, doesn't include like it can only be for rent for a certain period of time. So if someone does have to come stay for an extended period of time, that wouldn't, kick that out from being a hotel motel into some other category or disallow it in any way.
So we're okay with that one?
Matt, would it make sense to include for an overnight stay, which would preclude some motels, not here, that they rent rooms by the hour?
I think
Good question.
I think you could.
Don't be so sure we don't have those here.
Glasses half full.
I mean, something you could consider at the adoption phase is language like on a per room or per suite basis, and then and also just overnight, so you could really add just a couple of words to describe what you're talking about, could fix those problems, or those questions.
If you had overnight in here, then you could also use that on the flip side, that renting rooms for less than overnight or a certain window of time could help weed out what we don't want.
Yeah, exactly, yes,
So that's a possible change.
ma'am. Yeah.
That's a possible change.
Okay.
Catherine, would you like to sit over here?
I feel bad.
Okay.
No.
You did offer, I'll remind you that. Okay, she's writing that down. Item number 5, suggests modifying the definition of kennel commercial to the definition that's provided here. Once again, should council at the adoption phase prefer this definition and want to modify the planning board's recommendation, I don't have any technical issue with this definition as it's written. Any questions or thoughts?
I prefer how this number 5 is worded. I don't know how that is different. Even veterinary offices have kennels.
Yeah, and our ordinance defines veterinary offices and includes boarding at that, if you're primarily a vet and you allow some boarding within your facility, that's allowed under the veterinarian definition. What this is getting at is like a purely commercial kennel, like the only thing you do is board doggy daycare, things like that. So those two uses would be separated out based on, are you providing, is your primary business providing veterinary services, or is your primary business boarding and housing of domestic animals?
So I'm retired and I put up fencing that allows me to kennel dogs that I then get paid to take care of.
Well, you have to look at your supplemental regulations and see whether strictly outdoor kennels are allowed or not, or do you have to have a structure?
Well, I'm also not in a commercial district, I'm in a residential district, so, yeah, just considerations.
Now, there is also a definition in here for private kennels, which is a facility where 5 or more domestic animals over 4 months of age are maintained by the owner or the occupant of the property for the owner's personal enjoyment, hobby, or sport, whether or not for compensation.
Okay.
So there is
That's
a
covered. Got it.
commercial kennel, a private kennel, and then, as I mentioned, a veterinary office that offers boarding as well.
Thank you.
Those are delineated out.
See, under our zoning, kennels are only allowed in the CB district and the CLD, and then they're permitted, but they come with supplemental regulations. And that's where I want to talk about that later, but that's where the supplemental regulations become so important.
We have the peculiar, being a beach town, we have something called the Seabiscuit Animal Rescue. Does this affect them?
This definition wouldn't affect them. They've already established as well in their new location, I believe out on 133. So no, this wouldn't affect them, no. We worked really hard with them to get them into compliance with the ordinance for our new,
In their new facility.
in the new facility, yes.
So does that mean she can't keep anything at her house?
It doesn't necessarily mean she can't keep anything at her house. What we looked at was the operation, the the operation of a new facility at a new location,
Right.
does that meet our ordinance requirements?
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
But to take that further, the old location may not be in compliance now?
Well, I mean, I have a question of whether it was ever in compliance with our zoning ordinance.
And I'd hate to think that we're Mr. Scrooge and we knock on somebody's door when all they're doing is
I can say that
goodwill.
these changes in front of you would not affect
that.
the existing location, whether it is or not in violation of the ordinance. If it's already in violation of the ordinance, then this wouldn't change that status one way or another.
And this is just the definition.
Right.
Clarifying the definitions, where we are right now.
So someone in a residential district, if they've got 6 dogs at their house that are over the age of 4 months, they are in fact, they have to apply for a permit as a private kennel?
Well, it would depend on whether they're, housed and maintained in a separate
That's
facility or outside
They're
or,
not taking other animals, just there, they love dogs and
yeah, this
for
doesn't
some reason
really,
they.
this doesn't affect how many pets you can have, no,
I'm sorry?
sir. This doesn't affect how many pets you can have, no, sir.
Thank you.
If you wanted to build something in your backyard that was where the, animals stayed constantly, then this is what that would affect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay,
6.
yes, number 6. Apologize. The recommendation there was breaking towing into 2 definitions for towing automobile or truck incidental to automotive services. Certainly something to think about, whether you run a repair shop that you happen to have a record for, or whether your business is, your whole business is towing. So in that instance, breaking those 2 definitions out certainly provides some more certainty within the ordinance.
Where would I have recently read where it said anything, it says equipment, not vehicles, have to be behind the screen? Because this would seem in conflict to that.
That's a good question. It may have been some of the supplemental regulations. Typically, that's where you would put like screening, either there or in our regular performance standards, is where you put in screening and buffering requirements. So there may have been a supplemental regulation that you looked over that mentioned
Okay.
equipment being probably,
Just don't want to create a conflict.
yeah, probably within like contractors' offices with outdoor equipment storage. It
I'm
might
not sure
it
if
might
I
have been in
find it
there.
again, I'll let you
That's
know.
okay.
We also have a golf cart sales have to be behind fence, but
In our ordinance, they're
doesn't
supposed to be
seem
stored
be the
behind the
case
fence.
a lot.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we pursue several violations of that ordinance every year. Okay.
And that's why we hired two code enforcement people.
So those were the ones, once again, that were submitted related to definitions that were things that the planning board looked at. Certainly, like I said, Ms. Gardner performed a very thorough review of the definition section of the ordinance. Those weren't all definitions that the planning board looked at, because the charge was basically to make sure the items that were in the table of use had an appropriate definition. So I'd certainly welcome, or even if we want to, put it as a parking lot item, continued review of the definitions, consideration of Ms. Gardner's recommendations, going forward.
I'd like to add that if everybody's in agreement.
Yeah.
What's that we look at these?
To look further at all definitions that might pertain to our ordinances and
Yeah, Ms. Gardner reviewed
Yeah.
before you, the whole definition
Oh, it was
section.
amazing. I was wondering what was going to happen to these, because some of them were questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of good suggestions in there I'll mention as well, so definitely something we can pursue.
Yeah, if I can find it, there's one that refers to, had to do with dogs and livestock. And I don't know if it's the state of North Carolina, but in Pennsylvania, for instance, dogs are considered livestock.
They are or they are
They
not?
are. That's
Oh.
why there, you're not able
That's
to,
interesting. It's unusual.
that's why it's very difficult to hold the farmers who are puppy mills
Oh,
to standards because they fall under livestock.
gotcha.
So Liz, it's number 23 on my sheet, and it's definition for domesticated animal.
And
Thank you for that. Yeah, so on that, I think we have to look at state law.
yes, ma'am. Now, I can say from my experience in a county, in counties you deal with agriculture a lot because there's agricultural exemptions to zoning regulations in counties in North Carolina. We still regulated boarding, veterinary for dogs. Even though if you're boarding horses under the state law, that's considered agriculture. I couldn't regulate that via zoning, but dogs seem to be, in my experience, still fair game for zoning regulations. So I think that speaks to a little bit of the difference potentially here, but we could look into it further, absolutely.
Yeah, we just need to look at it relative to number 23.
So the state basically defines what is a bona fide farm.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
100%. Exactly right.
Supplemental rights, how do you
Well,
want to do this?
Before we continue on to supplemental regulations, I did want to check and see if anybody else had any questions, concerns, sticking points within the definition, so we can maybe try to wrap that, or the table of uses
Table of
itself,
uses.
maybe try to wrap that up before we move on to supplemental regulations.
So I really appreciate the ones that were included. I'm a little dismayed by some of the ones that weren't included. But perhaps that will come about in the next direction that we give the planning board for things to look at. Matt, one question I did have on the table of uses, which is probably also, it's also in the definitions, and I did make a note of it. Under residential, where we have dwelling, single-family small, and single-family large,
Yes.
do those still exist?
No.
Since we now have just a 4,000 square foot?
No, ma'am. Those were consolidated when the special use permit option was taken away and changed into mainland and island.
Okay.
So this table was drafted and written before that
Yeah.
public hearing and change was made.
November of
But
last year.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. But
Okay.
it was taken. And when we get you to public hearing, I'll make sure that that's included in that as well.
I'm unclear what's happening to Terry's document.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to the planning board for consideration, or we're going to look at this and revisit it?
I mean, that's at the pleasure of this board. I would think that anything that you want to consider sending to the planning board would probably be best done by majority council vote in a regular meeting. But
Well, I don't want
But
to
if
leave
you
some of
wanna-
these definitions off
I don't
the
either.
table.
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't, and it's not my intention here. No.
So I'm just wondering how we're going to circle back with this.
I think
Leave it
What-
to your discretion,
Well,
I'm happy to do.
one thing you could do to take action on it is either before or as we wrap this effort up, if after action is taken, there's something on our parking lot or something we've discussed that you want to go ahead and forward to planning board, I think it'd be perfectly fine to have that discussion and see what that recommendation does.
I would also hope that council would look at the original 10 recommendations, because we prioritized, or a council prioritized table of uses as the first one, and so
I did
figure out what the next one is.
And not to jump too far ahead into the future, but I did ask the planning board for their feedback on those 10 uses for our meeting next week as well. So we can definitely merge those two efforts together and go from there, absolutely. But like I said, I reviewed all of Ms. Gardner's recommendations for definitions, and there's a lot of great ideas in there. So I also wouldn't, want to hold it up or anything like that.
I'd like to mention a very valuable tool, and we all have it. Matt sent it to us by email, and I printed it out. This is something that the planning board started back in 2022, and we were just all keeping notes, and Carrie McCullough took the initiative to put it into a spreadsheet. And it's, once you figure out the key, it's not very complicated to read, but it shows you things that are planning board, things that have, were priorities, things that the council has already approved. But most importantly, it has things that the planning board felt like they should look at, aside from what Wes McLeod recommended. His was 10. This is comprehensive through the UDO, items that are of concern or pointed out in here. And it's not easy reading and it's not light reading, but if you go through here and look, something might strike you as being important that we need to go ahead and have them look at.
Do you recall the date that was sent?
Matt
Oh, it
sent
was right after the last
It
meeting.
was right after the last meeting.
It was the 16th, maybe? It was all, because I sent that and a clean draft
The-
of the table
Yeah,
together.
without the strike-throughs.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing to be thinking about through this whole process is, as we wrap this up, what does council want to prioritize is, the next small or big work item that you'd like to send to the planning board.
Take some of them off
Have-
their plate instead of them voting
Yeah.
on it and then bringing it to us and us voting on it again.
Yeah.
We can just vote on it on front end.
Might be easy if we look through it and pick out priority items. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. And I have an opinion about our UDO that's not very good, but,
No, it wouldn't go with this. My suggestion would be after we wrap this up, what we'll work on next.
So, yeah, some of the questions and concerns I've heard, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. This project or phase has already been through the planning board. This is what we're looking at. There's so much more, as Mr. Cartner and Chulo pointed out, but that's not part of this phase. So I think that's where we want to make sure that you all are okay with that, keeping this phase clean. It's already gone through planning board. It's to you to have a public hearing and approval. At the same time, we can be
Throw other stuff back
putting
there.
them in on notice for the second phase of this work.
Sure.
So it's not, it's parking lotting your other definitions just because they're not part of this direct project. But not that they're not important and need to
Absolutely.
go forward.
Lot of them.
Good.
Okay, any other questions, concerns, sticking points with the table or the definitions or anything? All right.
Table of uses and the definitions, that whole part of this phase.
Okay,
Good.
fantastic. So we'll move into the next part of the list that we have in front of you. A lot of these deal with supplemental regulations, questions, or recommendations. Several of these are questions. I'll do my best to go through and answer them. Some of what Mr. Chulo submitted, as Catherine just mentioned, don't necessarily fall directly under this, but certainly something we can put in the parking lot as we work through things. And I did review all of your questions, Mr. Chulo, so certainly starting to gather background information to help us work through some of those items should council want to.
Matt, if you would allow me before we go
Yeah,
into this, I
100%.
talked to Catherine about this last night when we talked about my list. So council charged the planning board with trying to get rid of as many S's, special use permits, as possible, for the reason that council felt their hands were tied often because the applicant only had to meet fairly loose criteria. And so what happens when you take the special use permit away is that, or the way to take it away is to assign supplemental regulations. And that's what we're getting ready to talk about. And the supplemental regulations are where your teeth come in for what the town wants to allow, doesn't want to allow, wants to see, doesn't want to see. And so they're probably the most important part of the UDO is specifying how people can build what they want to build and what guidelines and regulations they have to follow. So I talked to the mayor a few days ago, and she was like, well, what are we really doing with these? And I said, look at it this way, if you will. When you read a supplemental regulation, does it provide in your mind all the protections that you would want Oak Island to have if this business were operating in Oak Island? So that's what I would ask or suggest that we all consider when we go through supplemental regulations. There are many, many things you can specify in there, and we should make sure that we include everything that's important to the town.
What you actually said to me, which has another layer.
Sorry.
No, that's, you captured it.
I've slept since then.
Was when we, think about the culture and the climate and the town that we want to live in kind of thing, right? The community we want to live in. Do the restrictions support that? Do the supplemental regulations
Right.
support that idea of the community we want to live in?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But before we get started on it, Mr. Devil's Advocate, I'm in favor of height restrictions and setback restrictions, but I don't want us to get so restrictive that we tie people's hands to be able to punish them. And I don't think anybody's wanting to say that, but just before we get started, I just don't want to tie people's hands. I want them to be able to make a living and have their businesses. And we probably will.
Any other general comments or anything before we?
I just didn't realize for the first time.
Let's wait for Kath to work the planning board.
Yeah, well, this is everything. Oh, thank you. Doesn't that consent with the other definition?
No, but I found it.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll run through some of the things we got in advance of the meeting first, and then once again, open it up for questions where they can be answered, potential issues or pain points as well that we may need some additional work through or consideration of how to move forward. First question, really comment was to ensure that all the special uses have a supplemental regulation associated with them. I believe we accomplished that on the table of uses. I've looked through it several times and I think we caught everything, so glad to report that.
I was going half blind, trying to make sure I caught all of them, so thank you for
We only removed
Everybody
the
misses
special
something
uses
sometimes.
on the island, didn't we?
I'm sorry?
We only removed the special uses on the island, or did we remove them?
That's for large homes.
Yeah.
There's still other uses that require a special
That are
use
still
permit.
here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I spotted.
Okay. Number two, the two proposed hotels, which if any exceed the recommendations for 55 rooms per acre. And when UDO changes are approved by council, is there any impact to either of these two proposed hotels?
Matt, where are you now?
Number two, under supplemental regulations, questions / recommendations
Same page.
On-
All along.
this sheet. Sorry, I know I gave you a lot of stuff.
That's okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Number
Oh,
Bottom of the
two
page.
on Matt's handout.
It was a two-page
Two
document.
pages.
Same-
I wonder if I didn't end up with one.
You have it.
It's the same
I'm
one
sorry.
we've been going through.
Yeah, this is Terry's. And that looks like Terry's. I don't have it.
Did you give it to Bill? Oh,
Oh,
okay.
right there. Okay. All right.
right.
Never mind.
Sherlock Holmes.
Thank you very much.
All right, Bill.
You had it 3 minutes ago,
Hey,
and I didn't
missing
go for it, so I
documents,
knew it was
so-
still there.
So what the planning board recommended is basically pegged off of the planned and existing hotels on the island. And the thought there was to not allow anything more dense than what already exists under these uses. Regardless of whether that supplemental regulation changes or not, those two projects already have special use permits. So as long as the special use permit remains valid, you could change the regulations all day and it wouldn't affect their project and their vesting. They can still continue under that existing special use permit with the project as it was approved at the time.
Understood. So if the special use permit expires, that was my question on the
Oh.
Ocean Crest, which is really not Ocean Crest, the other one, owned by the Elks Lodge. Isn't moving forward, hasn't moved forward, may move forward, but if it doesn't move forward, their existing special use permit they got, did that exceed the 55 rooms per acre?
It did not, no.
Okay, that's what I thought both were, that's, thank you.
Yes.
Along Bob's question, when does their special use permit expire?
Special use permits are valid for 2 years. They can be extended up to 1 year at the approval of council. Since council issues a special use permit, you're the body that is tasked with determining whether or not to grant an extension. In order for the special use permit to remain valid, they need to get valid building permits and actually start construction on the project. Once that trigger's met, we don't have a mechanism really to take it away unless they stop work for over a year.
They
at
have
that
to
point.
start work within 2 years.
Yes, sir, or get an extension.
It's probably what happened.
It's getting close. Yeah, I think we're getting close to the boardwalk. I'd have to double check.
Say that louder.
I think we're getting close to the boardwalk, 2 years. I believe so. I have to double check it. It's closer than you think, probably. I think,
I don't remember when it originally.
I don't have it right off the top of my head.
Y'all didn't, y'all didn't hear.
I think it was like Q1,
So that's at least a year. That's at least a
It was
year.
2023.
early.
Yeah, early.
Yeah, it was early 2020.
February, March.
So it'll be coming up. Okay. Item.
March.
Yeah, March.
Sorry, Lisa's confirming it was March
March.
20th. Thank you, Lisa.
And it is the date of the approval is the date it expires. It doesn't wait for like signatures or anything like that. It's when council approves it is when the time clock starts.
And chances are, hypothetically, if it does expire and nobody does anything, it just lays dormant until somebody decides they want to do something and then they're
It will be a whole
told that
new
their time is
project.
up.
Again.
Yeah, it'll be a whole new
And
project.
they start over. Yeah.
Okay. Buffer yards requirement and fencing. We allow auto repair facilities to have neither a maintained yard buffer nor a fencing requirement. What language should be added to include significant buffer yard requirements and/or privacy fencing for existing as well as proposed auto repair facilities? And this one is a little bit more complicated answer. Zoning by nature is not retroactive. We can't impose something through a zoning ordinance and then say, oh, well, you're in this category, you have to go put in this, whether it's a buffer, whether it's landscaping, anything like that. The only way you can do that is through a semi-complicated process called amortization, where you look at the cost and the benefit and give them a time frame to come into compliance with the new ordinance. That's legally dubious in some instances to include amortization. So the soft answer to the existing ones is we have to encourage them in some way to want to do that. I will say that the council and Hallie have been working on and I believe approved the facade improvement grant program, which incentivizes people to beautify those properties. But it is voluntary, obviously. The best thing we can do, short of going through some type of amortization process for new ordinances, is to encourage folks and show the benefit of installing things like buffers, landscaping, things of that nature.
That's a perfect place for Howley's grant incentive.
As far as I know, we've been reaching out to some of those businesses.
That's what we're trying to do.
Pretty regularly.
The carrot instead of the
We'll
stick.
pay half of it if you'll clean some of this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we're trying to do.
So Matt, just for clarification, if there's a business that's unsightly and we change the ordinance, they don't have to go back and comply. If they sell that business to someone else who continues that same type of business, do they then have to come into compliance?
So what you're running into there is dealing with legal nonconformities, which I know we've talked about to some degree. So let's say you have a use that's not permitted on a piece of property, or some other feature of it is not in compliance with the ordinance. It either has to be triggered via the damage provisions or via the time provision. So like if, let's say a use is non-conforming. Under our current ordinance, if that use is abandoned for 180 days, then anything going forward has to come into compliance, but it has to meet that 180-day time clock before we can do it.
But if it were a change of use and
If
the
it was a-
new use
if it was a new
required
use, yes, ma'am.
fencing, then they would have to do
If it was a new use, yes, ma'am, but just the change of ownership would not trigger that. Yes, ma'am. As far as proposed uses, we do have buffer requirements for all commercial uses that abut residential uses. So whenever somebody comes in with a new development, that's how it's broken down too. It's not broken down based on zoning, it's broken down based on the use. So it doesn't matter from the CLD, the CB, ONI, Airport District. If you're setting up a commercial use and you abut a residential use, then you have a buffer requirement for the installation at that time. We have the categories we have right now that require buffers are multifamily when it's adjacent to residential, commercial when it's adjacent to residential, and industrial and office when it's adjacent to residential as well. I think that gets at one of your later comments too about specific buffers for the CB. It's not broken down based on the zoning, it's broken down based on the actual use.
So the auto repair business, so for new auto repair businesses, there's buffers in here. Is a buffer a fence?
Not necessarily. There's buffering, there's different levels of buffers in our ordinance, some of which are purely landscaping in nature, some of which do provide the option for a fence. So there's options, if you do a fence, you might have to plan a little bit less landscaping because there's an opaque visual break in there. And some of the supplemental regulations that the planning board recommended, they did look at a few uses and recommend specific buffers that included fences in that. So one of the things that they did in that review was, okay, we have general buffer standards. There might be specific uses that require, or that we think require a more specific buffer because, like I said, there's options under each for what type of buffer you can put in.
So, auto repair, so I just think of the one that we were talking about, where they're at any given time, there's 75 cars sitting out. For a new business that wants to put 75 cars sitting on their property, are we willing to consider asking them, well, putting that in the UDL, doesn't have to be behind a fence?
Yeah, you had that supplemental regulation, absolutely, if it's not already in planning board's recommendations, for sure.
Well, and my point is, when you have an option of vegetation or fencing, what could potentially be very unsightly, fencing at least gives you a little bit more visual appeal than we're looking for, rather than just putting some trees in, which may or may not achieve that goal.
I think the thing you have to think about and consider and weigh though, first of all, if you look in the supplemental regs, here's one under private clubs that says they shall be screened with a type C buffer. You have to go back in the ordinance and see how a type C buffer is defined. When you think about our business and commercial corridors, we have to weigh, do we want to drive down Oak Island Drive and see nothing but opaque fences, you know, or is it a little softer to have a mature planting, you know, screen where you have multiple heights of plants that provide, you know, it doesn't work to plant a 1 gallon and wait on it to grow, you know, you've got to plant a 5-gallon plant and,
Yeah, I was thinking more specifically towards the auto repair. I look at what, you know, Pete did on his golf carts and what they did at Strands. I mean, they put fences up, and, you know, all the LSBs are now in back of the fence. So we removed that from being, you know, an unsightly appearance on Oak Island
I
Drive.
mean, I'd kind of like to see a double effort. If you put an opaque fence up, then you got to put a landscape screening in front of it to soften it and make it green.
Okay, all right, that's what that one to do.
So Matt, is there anything in the ordinances relative to, so if I had a business and it's a garage and I'm fixing cars, then I have cars in the queue that are moving in and out based on parts and whatever else. But I might have cars that are just stored there with no purpose, there's no intention to fix them, there's no, is there a clock running on those vehicles? Because I would think that a lot of what's unsightly are the things that have now claimed a residence on a particular piece of property with no intention of doing anything with them,
Yeah.
other than letting them rust.
Absolutely. I mean, it is certainly a difficulty with automotive repair. It's always a hot topic. It would be difficult, you know, let's say we adopted a standard that maybe cars that aren't in the queue, or maybe they're going to take a few days to fix, maybe they stay on site, but maybe they're behind an opaque fence and a landscape buffer. To your point, if we set a time clock for how long they can stay there, I can't go back there and go check and say, hey, how long has this car been there, because it's behind a fence at that point.
Got
I
it.
think it's simple, just overnight parking,
Yeah.
you know, we just said.
A lot of places, you know, that I've worked at do have, you know, if the car, you know, cars that are to remain overnight awaiting repair, you know, have to be in a rear yard or have to be screened by an opaque fence or a combination fence and buffer or something like that. So,
Can we apply the same standards to businesses and commercial things as we do to residents? So the tag has to be licensed and a current registration on it?
You do get into a question of, I mean, you potentially could, because otherwise you might treat it as a junk vehicle like we do. You know, junk vehicle is a junk vehicle
Right.
for the definition. You know, you'd have to restrict the storage of junk vehicles in some way. You know, and I think some of these are great ideas. Once again, it's not retroactive. You know, so some of these businesses that we have, and a challenge that we have, is I've actually had the opportunity to look at aerial photography from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and some of these uses are there. And so, once again, it's very difficult to retroactively go back and say, for example, you can't, you know, if you got an automotive repair shop and for the last 60 years they've offered towing and vehicle storage and things like that, you know, if that use was legally established, short of an amortization period, that they'd have to come into compliance, you know, our hands are pretty, or an issue with the legal nonconformity that we could then enforce. And there are some strategies for that we can definitely, you know, have as a parking lot discussion going forward. I'd be happy to have that, actually print out a bunch of materials. Should we get into that discussion?
What I'm hearing you say so far is part of our dilemma could be this grant beautification where the town will pay 50%.
I don't think that's a
To-
dilemma. I think that's the
I mean,
solution.
that
to our
sure does.
dilemma.
If I had something that my neighbors were upset about, and all of a sudden somebody said, I'll pay half of it for you if you, I think we need to push that hard and heavy.
Like I said, we, as far as I know, Hallie's been reaching out to businesses left and right, trying to get folks interested in that program for sure. We've had a few applicants, but I don't know if any of the automotive repair ones have been one of them.
Not time to stop in.
It's a tough one for sure. Did y'all want to parking lot any of that specifically, or, you know, how to tackle existing businesses? I'm happy to
I've got
continue that discussion.
multiple notes that I wrote. I didn't have time to put them in a document.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know if we want to take the time today to go through them, or if you'd rather have me put them in a document. And it really goes to what I asked my fellow counselors. Look at this, does this provide the protection that you want to provide to the neighbor next door or the neighbor behind?
Absolutely. Well, how about we wrap up what we've got written down so far, and then we'll see how everybody's feeling about steps going forward, whether, does that sound okay with everyone?
Yeah, I just had one question and one comment. So my question related to automotive repair shops. Is there I'm assuming, is there a separate definition for vehicle salvage use? Like, you know, vehicle salvage and vehicle automotive repair are two different
Yeah.
operations.
So you define like a junkyard, basically like a salvage operation versus automotive repair. I think the difficulty we face is some of ours have operated as both for a long time.
And then so
it's very difficult in that instance, you know, if they were legally established, is having both of those uses to then deal with one versus the other.
Do we have
So
any
I-
salvage yards in confines of the city?
I think we
I
have.
mean, official salvage
I don't
yards.
think we have an official salvage yard, no, sir.
So to that point, I think there's some value in maybe looking a little bit closer at Terry's suggestion regarding whether or not the junk car enforcement can be applied in the commercial district.
Yeah, absolutely. We can,
That's what I was trying to get at too.
Yeah.
So calling it salvage gives it a different,
But I think to Bill's point, right, so we don't want to we want to allow people to continue to do their thing. We don't want to run businesses off, but, you know, striking a balance between allowing them to run their business and also allowing it to run in a way that's more visually attractive to the community.
Drive down the road.
Right. So we continue to encourage the grant program, and then maybe we look at the junk car ordinance. Those seem to be kind of soft and non-confrontational as starting point, I think.
If you can determine a junk car.
there's some pretty well laid out criteria for what
Yeah.
qualifies.
Yeah.
Current tag, it's not disassembled, it's road.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the,
I used to ask
2
people
or
to go
3
crank
car
it for
repair
me.
places in
It cranks and
O'Fallon.
runs.
I don't think coming down hard on junk cars is gonna clean up our car repair places.
One,
Think it will?
I think it'll make a dent.
yeah.
Well-
It'll help, but just, you know, just to send the signal. And once the
Right.
signal is sent, maybe we'll see behavior change.
I call it creating an awareness.
That's right.
And I like that Catherine has used the term vehicle rather than car, because there are
Yeah.
Salvage, junk.
buses
Boats, yeah.
and boats
All
and
kinds of
RVs. and-
Yeah, oh, yeah. Like I said, official and unofficial. We have some great unofficial salvage yards.
Okay. If we're ready, number 4, Mr. Chulo recommended or would like to discuss prohibiting restaurants with drive-throughs, citing the planning board's concern with drive-throughs and limiting their egress. This is something, our current ordinance, and, well, to some degree, our current ordinance and the proposed ordinance creates a clear delineation between restaurants with drive-throughs and restaurants without drive-throughs. that's something that many places recognize as having, very different impacts on, traffic, noise, lighting, et cetera, lots of different, walkability, certainly. So it's in your table now as a special, restaurants with drive-throughs are in the table now as a special use. The planning board did recommend supplemental regulations to that special use. Now, that's in the CB. In the CLD on the mainland, drive-throughs, restaurants with drive-throughs are just permitted. So definitely something for council to consider moving forward. Are there other supplemental regulations that make sense, or does it make sense to remove it? Something always, from a planning professional standpoint, look at it as in terms of walkability, right? If we're trying to create walkable towns, a lot of downtowns, small towns don't have restaurants with drive-throughs. But there's other uses that have drive-throughs too. So is it, we don't want drive-through restaurants, or do we not want drive-throughs? And if we separate those two, we need to be careful to, should council do that, to make clear the difference that you're looking at. So like, what's the difference in, this type of business with a drive-through versus this type of business with a drive-through, and why do we allow this and not allow this? If the drive-through is what we're looking at.
Right.
Yeah, if that's what we're looking at.
What, Terry?
Banks have drive-throughs.
Now, there may be other reasons that restaurants with drive-throughs or something you don't want to have in a certain zoning district.
I'm trying to
I
think
was-
off the top of my head, the coffee shop out going into South Harbor, that's a drive-through.
That's a
Yes, sir.
drive-through.
Pelicans is a drive-through.
Scoops.
Scoops,
Scoops is permitted,
yeah, they got a special use permit for theirs.
Yeah, that's the
and then the bank.
bank.
Pelicans
Both
would
banks.
not meet the current, the proposed, because there's no side road, there's no side road egress. The egress is right back onto Oak Island Drive, so that would be prohibited for another business.
Yeah, and, we try not to speak too much about businesses here, but if there is a restaurant that that is on the island currently and has a drive-through and does not have a special use permit, they're already legally non-conforming because our current ordinance
Like what
requires a
Bob
special
pointed
use
out, if they have an
permit.
egress out onto a side road, they're in, like Scoops, I guess they have they go out on the 54th or whatever street that is.
Yeah, that's something that the planning board recommended, was a location of the ingress and egress on a side road to try to deal with if there's ever a backup, in the drive-through line. Certainly that makes sense.
So, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
So this is a good example of kind of what I was trying to describe earlier. If you look on page 47 of our document, it shows the supplemental regulations at the bottom of the page, 7.90, restaurants with drive-through services. If you look at what the planning board has recommended, there's 5 different supplemental regulations. What I challenge us to look at is, does that cover it? Do we need to stipulate hours of operation? Do we need to stipulate that they can only have 1 window versus 2, or multiple windows? Do we need to stipulate where that window can be? Do we want to say it has to be on the side or the back rather than on the street front? What about outdoor speakers if they're adjacent to a house? Those are kinds of things that you can add into supplemental regulations that, I would encourage us to think about and consider.
I think that's a good point. But going back, drawing a connection between 790, restaurants with drive-through services, that in our definitions, we don't have drive-up windows or facility, which Terry, you pointed out in your document is number 24.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit as well.
So, that definition says automobiles, it needs to say vehicles.
Oh, you,
Number 24 in Terry's document.
oh, sorry, let me pull that up.
Yes, so that was just a suggestion to add to the current definition that we have.
But another cross-reference, if a restaurant with a drive-through service, yet we don't define what a drive-through window or drive-through service is that problematic, or should it be in both
They
places?
have added that.
Oh, yes, so I suggested adding that definition for
Yeah, yeah.
for how to define a drive-through or drive-up.
Yeah, and I'll kind of speak on that a little bit. Clear definitions in your ordinance are good, but that doesn't mean that if something is not defined in here, like a drive-through window, that there is no definition for it.
Okay.
What you do then is pull the common definition of a thing, you look in the dictionary, you look at what a thing is. So for the uses that are in the table, making sure that they have a definition is a good thing, but it's not always necessary when it's just a common thing, like a drive-through, like, hey, what is a drive-through service? Well, it's a window on the side of the building when you drive through and you pick up your food or you order your food or whatever.
But it doesn't, it's not always food.
Cross
Well,
our
that's
Ts and dot our Is
It could be cleaners, like in Northern Virginia, we have.
Oh, so you're saying a general all drive-through services definition?
drive-through
Okay.
services.
All right, I get where you're coming from.
Cross the Ts.
Oh, instead of just to restaurants.
Yeah.
I was saying,
Okay.
they did add it.
Sorry, I was a little confused. I get where you're coming from, though.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
another
Relative
business that
have-
has a drive-through
Keep it.
service, having a definition.
Just to be able
Gotcha.
to have a
Gotcha.
definition for drive-through.
Gotcha.
One conversation.
Gotcha.
Lost from Lisa.
Oh, she's so mean.
No, it's on her behalf, so he should.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Everybody can talk at once
My
about different
my
topics.
concern-
Make it really hard
She
for
won't
Lisa.
get good minutes that way.
Oh, I will eventually, but the public may be watching, might not.
So my concern to your point, Mayor, is I feel like that we should try to cover as many bases as we can and not leave things like definitions up to interpretation or to Webster, particularly if there is a planning definition. So,
It'd be okay if Miriam defined them, but not Webster.
okay.
I'm teasing.
Well, I get where you're coming from now, and I think I understand
Yeah.
the point you're trying to get at was other services that provide drive-throughs, how do we define that drive-through?
Right.
Okay, I thought we were trying to come up with a definition of what is a drive-through, so I apologize for that.
Matt, that's a good point, right? So that, I'm thinking drive-through restaurants, you're saying drive-through businesses. So, did we delineate, did we have the appetite to not allow drive-through restaurants, but then drive-through businesses? Do we want to put that restriction in or allow them to potentially have a drive-through business with the same side street egress requirement?
I'm thinking in my head, our banks on our island luckily do have the side street egress. Truist, the one across the street.
Citizens.
So far, yeah. But like Bob said, do we distinguish between restaurants and businesses?
Yeah. So it's a sticky issue for sure.
I would think no.
No, I think there are certain things that are associated with drive-throughs that we can capture.
A pharmacy, ours don't have it, but a lot of
Lots of
pharmacies
pharmacies
have drive-through
Drive-throughs.
windows.
In Florida, they have drive-through viewing at funeral homes.
Oh, my.
Yeah. In Florida, they have drive-through viewing areas for funeral homes.
We can ban that right now.
Florida's very
Definition for
progressive.
a drive-by.
Okay.
Well, I think this is probably something that the land use group is going to discuss, I imagine, right, with respect to drive-through restaurants. And, there's been so much pushback from the community about allowing drive-through restaurants versus any other type of business.
Not necessarily. They may not get that specific. Otherwise, the land use plan would heavily overlap the UDO. if it got down into that specific level of specificity. I'm thinking, I mean, I could see discussions happening with the land use plan that never touch on specific types of businesses or.
But that being said, I feel like we'll have a good handle from the land use plan on issues like, and because we're doing it with the streetscape master plan as well, issues like aesthetics, walkability, things we can do to enhance that type of development that we want to see on the island. But then, you're right, it's up to us to come together and craft the regulations to get to that vision in the end.
That points us to,
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
So if we're going to revisit and go to parking lot items and item, number 2, come back again, take another whack at it, another bite at the apple, then I would just remove that from this discussion.
Yeah,
Leave
Catherine
it on the
already
parking
wrote
lot.
Okay, number 5, we already touched on a little bit about buffering between CB and residential. Anybody have any other questions about
So
that?
that we have, now I remember talking, Matt, to David, and we've got, I know you looked into it, right, the number, we've got a large number of those, correct?
Of what?
Where you've got that split zoning.
Oh, for split zoning? I remember we had one that was rezoned at one point. I believe we have a couple more. The one that pops to mind right off the top of my head is the old Hardee's building. A portion of their parking lot is on a lot that's owned. With that being said, that's partially, are you talking about, first, are you talking about landscape buffers?
Say one more time.
Are you talking about landscaping buffers when you mentioned buffers?
Some
in
kind of
there?
landscaping buffers. And we're
Yeah.
unique, you think about it, right, between the buffer that we have between our CB, our commercial district and our residential district, at best is a fence or a tree.
100% right.
And that's all we have. I mean, we're very unusual, it's very unlike many other communities. So the more we can do to protect to honor that separation would be good.
Yeah, usually, just touching on your point, usually there's a transition zone between a corridor, a commercial corridor and a residential, area. There might be, a slightly less intense use between the two to kind of buffer that. I will say that this is, our current ordinance construction for landscape buffers, because it's not zoning specific, it's use specific, is actually more beneficial in the instance of split zoning. Because it doesn't matter that a portion of that business is in the that commercial use is in the R6 or whatever residential zoning, that's a commercial use of that property. So that commercial use, when it's established, needs to meet all the buffering criteria. Because if it was based on the zoning, we would say, okay, well, this portion's in the R6, that's a residential zone against a residential zone, there's no buffer required.
Nothing's needed.
So I think the way our general buffer standards are constructed actually are a little bit advantageous towards split zoning because for just that situation.
Yeah, we corrected one of the parcels
There was
not too long ago.
a zoning map amendment for the old doctor's office,
That-
the parking lot back there.
She's on there, wherever that was.
Yeah, and then I guess, just for clarification, I understand the intent of trying to, I guess, formalize some sort of buffer material, but I also think that, the resident that owns or purchases a residential property adjacent to a commercial property, they have every right, the property owner, to do their own landscaping and invest their own money in fencing or whatever they want to do to beautify their property. And they made the commitment to purchase next door to a commercial business district. So I want to make sure that we're not just trying to put the cost burden on the commercial business owner and say, hey, Mr. Business Owner, you've got to do all this beautification because you're adjacent to a residential property. I just want to make sure that's not the intent of what we're trying to do by looking at any further definitions here. It's just, I would hate to just continue piling on additional, cost burden to the commercial business owner just to satisfy a residential property owner next door, so.
that goes against the business-friendly
Right, exactly.
reputation
Yeah.
we'd love to establish with a happy medium.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions or anything on buffers? Mr. Bach sent in a few, I think, more general items to discuss. And so I'll try my best to touch on some of these without the benefit of him being here to give us his thoughts on them. The first one he wrote down was signage. Certainly a very relevant topic. And it was actually one of the 10 priorities that Wes gave us was, hey, you know, when do you guys want to do a thorough re-review of your signage ordinances? That being said, signage is in a whole separate section of the ordinance than the supplemental regulations and the table of uses. That's in the performance standards. So signage wasn't really looked at under this effort. But like I said, it was even one of the things that Wes said the town, they would recommend they take a look at. So certainly something, and we've made some tweaks to signage regulations here and there. I think are beneficial to the town, but I will, just to set everyone's expectation, should council or anyone recommend a thorough audit of signage regulations, if you think what we're doing right now is hard, the signage regulations are even harder. So be happy to work on it. That's a tough row to hoe.
Is there a stipulation now on how many signs a business can have?
There's different categories. Now there's freestanding signs, window signs, wall signs, et cetera. And you can have a combination of those, but you might only be allowed like one freestanding sign. Or
If I were to rent a part of a building from a company that already has their signage established, will I be prohibited in putting up my own signage?
if it's on the same parcel,
I would be prohibited?
you'd be prohibited if they have a freestanding sign and it's all on the same piece of land and you're just renting a portion of that. If there's an existing freestanding sign there, a pole sign, monument sign, whatever, you would not be allowed an additional freestanding sign. You might be allowed a wall sign or a window sign or something like that, but not another freestanding sign out by the road.
You know what I'm getting
I
at?
do.
Yeah, it does happen, yeah, absolutely. Typically, what happens in that situation is, because we don't control the content of the sign, right? So let's say you've got a building that's divided up into 5 suites, and you're allowed one sign. You take that sign and you break it into grids.
Like you
and
did at Bob's Dog Church.
list each business individually on the one sign that you're allotted. Now, that's content. I can't make somebody do that. But it is typically what you see a lot of, where you have storefronts all on one piece of land. Yeah.
What about signs that have outlived their useful lifespan?
Yeah.
Such as a building that
Yeah.
has been vacated
Yeah.
for decades.
That's a great question that was recently answered by our friends at the General Assembly. The General Assembly at their last session passed rules for how towns have to treat existing on-premise, existing signage. And basically established nonconformity rules at the state level for signages on property. Not only can they be rebuilt within 2 years of even the total destruction of the sign. So that if that sign gets blown down, somebody comes back 2 years and 364 days, or 1 year and 364 days later and says, I want to build this sign back. Under the state statute, they're now allowed to do that.
They're
In
not
addition,
allowed.
they are allowed.
They are allowed.
Yeah, up to 2 years. In addition, it can be moved anywhere on the property as long as it doesn't increase the height or the size of the sign. So I have a sign over here that was legally established, and I want to move it over here. There's no criteria that the town can apply to that. And then finally, in order for like a dilapidated sign or something like that, or a sign that the town wants removed for whatever reason, we now have to pay not just for the removal of the sign, but for the establishment of the new sign that meets the criteria of our ordinance as well. So that statute was basically, a lot of these rules have existed a long time for off-premise signs, so like billboards on the highway. A lot of that was applied almost exactly to now on-premise signs. So I say all that to, kind of give you guys where signage is looked at from the statutory standpoint. We're really, with those signs that are already out there, we're really behind the 8 ball as far as getting them changed into something else or removed or anything like that.
And it makes no difference whether the business is in operation or not.
If that signage was legally established at the time it was established, I'm kind of stuck with it at that point. Yes, ma'am.
So abandoned buildings, we have no,
Not for the signage. If that
no,
sign,
but let's say not even the signage, but the building.
the building, we could do, things like condemnation and things like that. That goes through building code. But let's say there's an abandoned building and there's a sign in front of it, because of this new state statute, we're gonna have some trouble dealing with the signage itself. Other than, if we go through the procedure and get an order to demolish a building, if that sign's on the building, well, the sign's going down too. But
So if a sign at an abandoned business loses its content, so the innards are gone and all there is a frame on a monopole, and then eventually the monopole falls down, can that then be turned into a nuisance abatement because it's littering the property?
It potentially could. We can take a
Thank
look
you,
at that.
that's all I need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely submit it. We'll
But
take
the
a look
same
and
can be
see.
said of an abandoned,
But that-
dilapidated building.
But that being said, because of this new state, let's say we said, okay, now your sign before was 20 feet tall, and now it's got to be 15 feet taller. It was here, and now it's got to be there. If it's within that 2-year time frame, they can put up the exact same sign in the exact same location that it was without any.
But there's not a business there.
The property owner, anybody who owns that
Right,
property
so
can do it.
does the town keep a record of how long a building has been vacant? Because I'm pretty sure this one's way past the 2-year limit.
Yeah, well, the 2-year limit started with the adoption of the statute. It's not retroactive, it's going forward.
Okay, and what was that date?
Uh,
I'm sorry.
I can look it up. It was this last session, but I'll be happy
Okay.
to look it up for you
All right.
and get back with you on that. Yeah, it really, and that's another thing, if we do a full review of our sign ordinance going forward, we have to keep in mind that the existing signs we have, are likely to persist, for a long time because of those statutory requirements in place, unless the town is interested in paying to have them removed and rebuilt, which can be quite costly.
So what about signs that are currently non-conforming and a business has been notified multiple times and the signs remain, we've never forced any action on them. So if that sign comes down by an act of God or whatever else, they can rebuild a non-conforming
Yeah,
sign.
this is specifically what it applies to, is non-conforming signs. Yes, ma'am.
So that seemingly, to me, means we need to get rid of the signs that are currently non-conforming before something happens to them.
Well, we now have to pay them the cost of removing the sign and the cost
Because
of
we
building the
didn't
sign.
act,
Just because that's what the state statute says. now.
yeah, but we drug our feet and didn't act, and now we're stuck.
I-
Sorry.
To go back to something, Matt, is there anything that can be done? Building on Oak Island Drive did not need all of their space. They had one business in that space on Oak Island Drive. A jewelry store rented 500 or 600 feet from them. could not put up a sign advertising that they existed, and nobody knew they were there. And they moved out, they joined the Chamber of Commerce, they got all their permits for the town of Oak Island. They said, but the town of Oak Island won't allow me to do signage. Nobody knows I'm here, I'm moving to Leland. Is there anything we can do for those situations?
You can amend the ordinance to allow additional signage in certain situations. There's not anything under the current ordinance that could be done.
Pardon me?
There's not anything under the current ordinance that could be done aside from, like I said, wall, window signage, things like that, but not a freestanding sign if one's already there, or if there's not room on the
Because
site.
there's now going to be an empty
Setbacks.
spot in that spot because nobody else will want to rent it either because they won't be able to put up a sign calling attention to their business. Another thing to change ordinance on, and then I'll hush, and I don't have a dog in this hunt. My friends who do real estate don't do open houses. They have other people do open houses for them. But I've had realtors who do open houses tell me the town picks up their open house signs,
100%.
and they can't advertise their business. Is there any way we can allow them to put up an open house sign from 11 to 2 on a Thursday? They all are getting around the loophole by doing their open houses on Saturday and Sunday when there's no code enforcement people working.
You can permit all temporary signage within the right-of-way. You can set limits on the placement and the time, but you cannot call out
One business.
one
Yeah.
business
No,
or
no.
one type of use.
Could make it event-related.
You can make it
Time-related?
time-bound.
3 or 4 hour?
Placement requirements, numbers requirements, but if we allow any temporary sign in the right-of-way, we have to treat them all exactly the same.
I can understand that, but for a 4-hour period, we could use that kind of language.
You have to amend the ordinance, but yes, sir. The current ordinance doesn't allow for most temporary signs in the right-of-way.
And Matt, if signs are picked up, I've heard from some realtors on the island that when they come to pick it up here in Town Hall, they're charged $25.
Yeah, yeah.
We do that, huh?
Sir.
And if they had 3 or 4 signs in a week,
And we do that to discourage behavior?
It's part of the ordinance. It's not even in the,
floodiness.
it's actually in the ordinance, the
ordinance
$25,
itself.
yeah.
But the ordinance really, though, the spirit of that law was, so every hamburger stand, every coffee shop in town would be advertising 49-cent coffee and 69-cent hot dogs on a regular basis. And by doing that, we also inhibited some people that in 50 states in America, they all do that, but the town of Oak Island.
Well, let's say you allow, in the spirit of your ordinance, allow a temporary sign in the right-of-way for 4 hours for an event. Those other businesses that you might be wanting to discourage will know that, hey, now from 11 to 3 every day, my temporary sign is now permitted in the right-of-way.
There's a lunch special.
Yeah.
69-cent hot dog, I need to know
I'd
about.
probably go to that. I need to know about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's why,
I just want everybody to hear the conversation.
and that's why I said at the beginning of this is that if you thought this was hard, signs are tough because it's a tough balancing act and towns struggle with it all the time.
I appreciate what all you've done.
I could-
More so than I did before I walked in today.
I would encourage us to make it business-related signage.
Yeah, you can, there's a couple of content things that are still valid. This all stems from Supreme Court cases. So commercial versus non-commercial speech, on-premise versus off-premise. You can do those contents. What you can't do is like, a real estate sign versus a restaurant sign. That's too specific. It doesn't meet the criteria.
There are
But
other signs
but
I
yeah.
would prefer not to show up right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Couple other things. Offices, business in the home. I know that was a big topic of discussion last time. The planning board did recommend a suite of home occupation standards supplemental in addition to what we currently have. I got the sense last meeting that this is something that some members thought needed a lot of discussion and, consideration of. I don't know how everybody feels about that, but, or whether people have thoughts or
I
discussion.
think the issue was more about commercial businesses being run out of the home. It wasn't the home occupations. Yes.
Yeah.
I think if you had any.
And that,
on that.
and that's a current, in my opinion, a current weakness of the supplemental regulations for home occupations right now. They're not super specific. So you do get things that creep into more of a commercial operation very easily versus what you might think of as a home occupation, home office type of use. What the planning board looked at was restricting things like equipment that creates noise, vibration, and glare, mechanical equipment installed outside the building or used in any other manner than is normally used for domestic purposes, changing the outside appearance of the building or the premise for the purpose of the home occupation, traffic, accessory building use, outside storage. I think we don't really very tightly regulate that right now based on our current supplemental regulations because they're just not super specific. So if we do want to your point, kind of craft that division of say, hey, this is commercial, this isn't a home occupation anymore. We need to more tightly describe what a home occupation
Two dump
is
trucks.
and what you need to do to qualify for it. And that would certainly assist with a lot of those instances where.
Can we get that
Okay.
language?
You have what they recommended on page
39.
I mean, I'm not opposed to some guy that
39.
cuts
And I don't either.
6 yards
And-
every 2 weeks
and
for
that-
some spending money.
That's right,
But
that's
3 bulldozers and a dump truck is,
that's kind of the needle you have to thread and that's, up to this council to determine.
But I think it's worth,
policy of what-
I think
what
it's
does
worth
what.
vetting.
Yeah,
Well,
find
and
a
to
little
me,
bit
home
more of that.
occupation, you say what's someone's occupation, right? I mean, they're a lawyer, or an architect, or, whatever that might be, an IT specialist or something, that's an occupation. But someone that sells pet rocks behind a 6-foot fence, an illegal 6-foot fence, that's not an occupation. That's a commercial business.
Yeah. Yeah, an accountant doing accounting work from his house is more power to him.
That's an
as far-
occupation.
As far as I'm concerned, more power to
They
him.
added any definitions?
They want to spend $600 for office space.
Yeah, it didn't change.
Yeah.
I have no
And-
issue.
I have no issue with that.
And so you could even, in places that did this too, you said, okay, we're gonna come up, in our regulation of home occupation, we're gonna come up with a list of uses that we would consider home occupations. So, accounting office, or like, things like that, to further, to your point, get between those two things. So you might say, okay, here's all the supplemental regulations of housing occupations, and the last one is, these are the uses, or these are the occupations that qualify for a home occupation, so that you don't have things like that.
But those are the ones that we could think of at that moment in time.
Yeah.
So what happens when somebody they come forward with a new occupation that's not in our,
Well, you would say that these are the only ones that are permitted as a home occupation, so a new one would not fall under that category, and then they'd either not be allowed, or they'd have to come before you with a text amendment to add that to the list, essentially. Then it'd be at your discretion.
that feels heavy,
It does.
a pet rock business that might not make our list.
Yeah.
And if somebody comes forward and they want to do pet rocks out of their house and it's not on
But
our
that's
list.
a commercial business that doesn't belong in a residential area, in my
Or
opinion.
not, whatever,
You mean big boulders like that rock, right?
yeah.
Tough.
Or Ellis fees. Or Ellis fees.
We've got that documented on our
Who say they're permanent.
supplemental regs.
Additionally, Matt, do we want to put, as far as definitions, have we defined a commercial business anywhere in here?
I don't believe there's
If
a
we haven't, that
specific
might
definition
be
of
a good thing
commercial.
for us to do.
There's a definition for home
Before we get
occupations.
too far down the road.
Yeah.
There is for home occupations.
Yeah.
I was just looking that up.
But the flip side of that would be commercial business.
Right, so everything is not included here in home occupation is by default defined as a commercial business, but we probably want to get a little bit more.
Yeah. And yeah, like it, so if you meet the definition, you know, our definition of home occupation, and you meet the supplemental regulations as they currently exist, you're allowed to operate that as a home occupation, you know? So I think what you're getting at is like, is there a commercial use in residential areas
For instance,
definition?
you run a marine construction business in the residential district. You know, we haven't defined commercial businesses, so that's probably something from a risk mitigation perspective, we probably want to have wording in there that would give us some ground cover from a legal perspective.
I think it comes
But
down
does it no-
to, we're all in favor of those people doing their business, they just need a storage yard somewhere else,
Doing the right things.
not in the residential section.
Yeah,
They can't have, you should just have mechanical on it. Or vehicle equipment.
So the other situation, I mean, if they have equipment, it should be put in the backyard.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you can do too, is like
Not
be
the
place
front yard.
specific about where things can go. That's anytime you have zoning, is you can say whether things need to go in the side or the rear yard or whatever.
And if your business is selling corn and you grow that corn in your front yard, to the objection of your neighbors, I mean, should that be allowed? Or should that have to
You
be
guys are
in the
counsel,
backyard?
you tell me.
Well, additionally, let's go back to the hypothetical marine construction truck, which is 8 foot off the ground, and 6 foot is the highest fence height that they could possibly put a fence at. It's visible from the road, therefore, that would violate our zoning regs.
Yeah, one thing, I don't know that the planning board recommended it, but that I've run into, with home occupations and the supplemental regulations is, you know, like the vehicles that are associated with that home occupation, you know, whether it be trailers, trucks, whatever, you know, having some type of limitation on the number or the size of those things. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Just a couple more to get through. Mr. Bach sent a note for right-of-way. I'm not 100% sure what he intended for that. Right-of-way
I don't
issue-
know either, possibly gravel.
Outside
Yeah.
supplemental roads.
Right, but similar to signage, right-of-way issues are handled outside of supplemental regulations and our general zoning and ordinance standards. So if there are right-of-way standards we need to look at, we definitely can have that conversation separate from this one.
I suspect we'll have a fairly hearty conversation about right-of-ways when Alliance
Yeah,
finishes
absolutely.
their survey.
Yeah, 100%.
And then we'll come to understand where there are policies and ordinances and things that might need to be tweaked or
Yeah, that's a good
created
point.
or.
Yeah. And that might be what he was getting at, was the standards for what can and can't go into the right-of-way. And I think Catherine told you guys they start next week, Monday morning, so.
Lions?
Yeah.
Starts next week?
18th?
18th. So excited for that project too. Number 9, developing business-friendly regs for off-island commercial development. I think we've heard that sentiment a couple of times in here to try to make sure that what we're doing is, you know, gets at what we want to see for the island, but also doesn't overburden businesses that might want to move in, that we want to see move in, especially.
Where
Just
that, I'm sorry, okay.
I was just gonna say, I was just gonna leave that as a general comment. I think it's something that's on everybody's mind for sure.
And we've hired an economic development director, we've got to give her
And
some room to develop economy.
And I coordinate with her. We talk all the time about the planning activities and things that are moving through the planning board to try to get her insight and feedback on it as well.
The challenge with number 9 also is, for us, off-island, is our 2 major roads that come into the island. So how friendly do we want to make them if we care about what our entryway to the town looks like? So there's friendly and there's friendly.
Yes, ma'am. I agree.
If we don't attract new businesses, we'll have no more sources of revenue, and then we run into a tax problem.
Oh, I'm all over that. I'm total agreement.
All right, number 10, tax shuttle bus regulations. It's just a general comment. People operating on public roads, running through town is one thing versus a land use, or whether you're setting up something on a private piece of property. So I'm a little bit unsure about what the intent here is. If it's to, regulate taxis and shuttles operating on our public roads within the town, there's some concern about.
Stop you somewhere for 3 minutes and pick you up.
Yeah, that might be a regulatory concern for the town, but it's not necessarily like a land use supplemental regulation that we would be looking at.
There was nothing related to that in the planning board's recommendations, was there?
No, there was one thing for a taxi stand,
Stands.
because we had that use identified in our ordinance, and because, if somebody, and once again, that would be establishing a taxi stand on a private piece of property, not-
Right now, the taxis and the shuttle services, I'm assuming they get permission to stop at Second Wind's parking lot or Publix parking lot. They get permission to stop there.
I mean, they'd get it from the individual business,
Hasn't been an issue.
So we define taxi stand, but not taxi.
Yeah, because the taxi itself operating on the road, like, what,
It's not a land use.
yeah, what,
You're saying it's not
It's not
land
a
use?
It's not land use.
Outside of,
I mean, but it's hard to have regs for, if you're not defining taxi or shuttle or trolley.
well, because those aren't land use related. Those are vehicles operating on the public.
Yes, the town
Yeah.
can create ordinances in its code of ordinances
In the
that,
code of ordinances.
Yeah, that'd be
right?
something y'all would talk with Chief Morris about, basically.
Got it.
Outside of my
I'm with you.
area.
I'm pretty sure the state
Has a
already
second.
I think they do have.
defined ride share, taxi, and
Yeah.
And the last one, I think what he's trying to get at here is a little bit to what Terry's getting at as well, is reducing the number of uses impinging on residential uses. I think that's kind of related to like, how do we, reduce that conflict between, commercial and residential uses.
Buffer zones and what have you.
Maybe, that's kind of the only thing I can think of, because otherwise it's getting more into the use table of like, hey, is there a commercial use in a residential area? It's a little bit different than the supplemental regulations.
Matt, is it possible what he meant is, and that was the item 1 on my list I sent you, was to increase the number of prohibited uses?
Yeah.
And that might be what he's aiming at.
It could be, and I'm happy to talk about that from my perspective for sure. Because it's come up here and there, planning board, and I know it came up a little bit last month as well. In towns, as Terry mentioned last month, that they can find uses, that they want to prohibit townwide. The trick to that is, in order to prohibit an otherwise lawfully legal use of property, you have to associate specific health safety hazards that are associated with that use. So you have to be very careful about how you look at and approach those, because otherwise, if somebody wants to establish one and we say it's prohibited, and they say, why is it prohibited? They pull the minutes and, well, we just prohibited it. Well, that's not going to stand up to a court challenge at all. So if there are uses that are out there that we want to prohibit, I think a good strategy for council to consider would be to kind of tackle them like one at a time, so we can be very clear, because some uses, like, if you say, okay, a landfill's got one health and safety component to it, and a penal colony has a health and safety component to it, well, those probably have very different health and safety components to it, and you don't really want to kind of muddle that up between the two. But it's definitely something, if the majority council wants to pursue, we can work through that with the planning board and then with town council as well.
And the list that I printed off from Wilmington has some pretty good prohibited uses on there, and I'm happy to share it with everybody, or I can send it to Lisa and ask Lisa to share it with everybody. Just gives you an idea. Slaughterhouses, ordnance manufacturing, those,
I looked up a few as well, and those are, see a lot of those like fireworks and ordnance manufacturing. One had a weird word for a slaughterhouse, abattoir. That's what they call the slaughterhouse.
That's right.
I had to look that up.
Yeah.
And you see things like landfills, things that you can really kind of make that direct and easily identifiable health safety connection to. Otherwise, it's very difficult to survive a court challenge to prohibit otherwise lawful use of land.
Pat, am I hearing then it would be a future project for the planning board to go through each of these to see which ones that they would recommend as being prohibited, and we'll have a discussion at town council?
Well, if you want to, it would have to go to planning board for comment.
Okay.
Regardless.
But have them do that. I guess what I'm saying is having them
Yeah, it wouldn't
go
hurt.
through.
Yeah. Save you guys.
That's a long process.
Matt, we've had this is on a slightly different, it's part of our table of uses, but a slightly different topic. I know we talked about it a lot in the planning board. We currently have an industrial zone in our table of uses, although on our zoning map, we do not have an industrial zone anywhere. Can you just briefly talk about the reason we have that on here and what the downside to that might be?
Yeah. I don't want to speculate on the reasoning since it wasn't, I wasn't present for the adoption stuff. I can kind of give my own interpretation of it. In our industrial district, as it's currently constructed and as the planning board recommended, those are a lot of industrial uses, and in some cases, heavy industrial uses. Without knowing too much about the history, it makes sense to potentially have that zoning district in there for those uses. Because in order to establish one, somebody's going to have to come in for a zoning map amendment, which is a legislative decision by town council. And in the town council deliberation, you're required to look at all of the permitted uses in that. So you might say, they can't come in and say, oh, I'm just going to build this. You got to look at everything. So in doing that, you create a place where people are not only going to have to ask for permission to do it of town council in a legislative decision, where you guys have kind of the most discretion you have available to you, but you have to consider all of the potential uses of that piece of property in doing so. So it may potentially kind of work around some of the difficulties of totally prohibiting a use, because it's not totally prohibited. It's available in a district. If somebody wants to come in and ask for a rezoning, well, then council gets to decide whether they want to rezone that piece of property or not, based on that feeling. So if it may be kind of that holding district for some of the heavier intensity uses that and before you decide whether you want to see it or not, it's not even quasi, we talked about quasi-judicial, it's not even that, it's legislative. It's very broad discretion applied to that as to whether you want to establish that district or not.
So there are situations in our table of uses where we have uses that are only permitted, whether it's permitted by right or permitted with supplemental regulations or special use with supplemental regulations. If we were to take the industrial zoning out, and that's the only place those are located, that means we don't permit those things?
Well, no, it doesn't mean we don't permit those things.
Because, I mean, there's some ones to consider in here, like petroleum bulk storage.
Yeah, absolutely. What that would do, under the current court cases for zoning, just not listing a use doesn't make it prohibited. It means that when someone comes in and requests it, the town has to determine what's the next closest thing to it and apply that standard to it. So that's a little bit, if you do away with that district, and those uses aren't accommodated for somewhere else or included on a list of blanket prohibited uses, then the next person that comes in, it'll be up to to town staff and me to determine the next closest use based on the guidance that our ordinance provides and apply those standards.
Okay.
Which may not be sufficient.
I 100% agree. I don't want to be put in that position. Please don't put me in that position. I'm happy to do it, but it's a tough one too. So I think the industrial district, as it's currently constructed in our ordinance, does certainly serve a purpose for us as the town by
Our
allowing.
commercial district is zoned for industrial?
Yes, sir.
Industrial zoning anywhere.
Where is that? Do we have?
We don't have one.
We don't have one at all. There's no, it's on our
It's not on the
table,
zoning map.
but there's no property zone. So what I'm getting at is, so let's say someone comes, or you, Mr. Chulo, you say, I want to start one of these uses that's only allowed in the industrial zoning. Matt, how do I do that? I say, well, you have to find a piece of property. You have to come in front of town council and ask them not to just permit your use, but to rezone that whole
Rezone it.
piece of property. That's a pretty high bar in a lot of instances.
Why would we not designate some areas as commercial and industrial?
I mean, you could certainly allow limited industrial uses in certain commercial areas if you wanted to. I've heard comments several times about, the airport and things like that. So like if, under the planning board's recommendations, if you want to allow like light industrial, which is all contained and all, there's no outside manufacturer, there's not any noise, smell, vibration or anything off of the property. That's certainly reasonable to me, but it's a land use discretionary decision for council whether you want to allow something like that or not. Certainly would keep heavy industrial as a special use because it does have those externalities related to it that you want to kind of try to evaluate in a public hearing.
Does that provide incentive for those types of things to be created, or does it lower, I guess, I want to choose my words carefully here. By having a commercial light industrial area, does that invite in businesses who might want that kind of development versus not having it defined and they're having to come to council and fight for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that even if you weren't inclined to do it now, they'd still have the option. Anybody can come in and ask for a text amendment to change a criteria on the table of uses from not allowed to allowed. But
It's
that's,
just a heavier lift.
yeah, but you're right, it is a heavier lift. I think when I think about the airport, I don't know that it incentivizes that, but it would allow it. And it would allow that, specifically the airport, that's what I think about when I think about this. So if there's other pieces or places in town where you'd want to think about that, feel free. But it would allow them to kind of choose their own destiny for what they're bringing in. If they have somebody approach them or if they're recruiting a type of business that might fall in a light industrial or something like that category, then it would probably be the airport coming in front of you to ask for a text amendment like
Does
that.
the airport district allow that currently, or they'd have to come in on with a text amendment?
Then it'd have to
It
go-
wouldn't be
Or
on
the
there.
road even across the street from the airport, intercoastal roofing and some of those other business, that's a quasi-industrial area right there.
Yeah, I mean, when you think, when you think about, light industrial specifically, it's not vastly different from what you see on our airport specifically, where there's smaller hangars. Most of the work is done indoors and enclosed. But, it is a different use. So, from a
Are
development
we
impact
hurting
standpoint, I
ourselves
don't know
by
that you would see
not
a
listing it? Are we hurting ourselves by not addressing it on the front end?
It depends on, whether you want Howie to come in here and ask for it when someone comes and ask him to do it. Not that that's good or bad, but I guess that's what I'm setting you up for, is that if someone sees an opportunity out, or in any district really, but specifically that one, that says, hey, we think this would be a great place for our business. It qualifies as light industrial, but it's not allowed. Their avenue to get it changed is,
But like what Bob alluded to, the airport district is its own,
it is its own district. It's a
that's an
specific
animal
zone
unto
district.
itself.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that the land use plan update might give us some insight into development on the mainland, as well as our strategic plan. And we
100%.
look at those things in concert and then decide if we
Good idea.
want to,
Withers.
create industrial uses.
Yeah.
I would agree. I'd be in favor of light industrial. I don't know how much industrial we want to get, but my understanding when reading about zoning is one of the benefits of zoning is not just to rule out, but is as much to rule in what you want to attract.
That's right, yeah.
So by including a light industrial area where it wouldn't compete with residential, to me, opens that door and is an invitation for some to use that land for that purpose. And that would also help incent our commercial revenue stream.
Yeah,
So that's
Definitely.
kind of how I think about it. Doesn't make it right. It's
great
just.
point. Yeah, I mean, I know we hear, no one's ever submitted anything, but we hear different things about what are the plans at the airport and how do they want to develop and things like that. And, if you did allow something else in there, it would really just be another tool for them to figure out, which way they want to go. Because just because it would invite people, but just because you allow it also doesn't mean you're going to see it developing that way out there.
Right.
It's not a guarantee. I mean, we have commercial property that's vacant, so, yeah, absolutely. I get where you're coming from.
A lot of that is just a natural result of who we are, our demographics, our geographic location. Light industrial companies, while it'd be great to try to attract, maybe a third-party logistics company here, they look for cheap land. I don't know where cheap land exists in our jurisdiction. So that's a prohibitor right there, from the beginning, right? Is the cost to locate here. Then the other challenge is, well, why would they come here? Yeah, we have an airport, but Wilmington has an airport, and Wilmington's very aggressive in attracting light industrial surrounding their airport. Land's cheaper. You're open to a much larger market by coming in and out of Wilmington, ILM, so.
And they have the space out there by the
Right,
river.
and they have the space, so, it does make it a little bit of a challenge for us to attract even light industrial. And our commercial, tends to lean, what do we have? Retail, restaurants. I mean, it's very unlikely that some other abstract commercial business is gonna wanna target, ooh, look at Oak Island, I want to build there, right? And
We can make brake shoes.
Right, exactly, Callahan brake pads, I'm gonna build in Oak Island, it just wouldn't make sense for them, right? So I think that helps us, right? It helps us,
Yeah.
but it also hinders us, because we wanna grow our tax base. We want to grow our commercial tax base. We want to offer employment, right, opportunities for people. And so what's the best way to get there, right?
Well, we might attract architectural firms, I mean, I've seen those kinds of business parks as well, that maybe isn't the light industrial, but is the professional offices.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot less expensive for them to occupy that kind of space
Yep.
than, design, interior design firms. I mean, those all would find that kind of a situation attractive, perhaps.
So Catherine and Matt, what's our next step on this?
So the next step is he's going to give you options for moving forward. We wanted to hear this discussion and make sure you had plenty of time to flesh out those pain points, and then the options.
Yes. So there's a few avenues we could take going forward. What we had potentially envisioned was, if council is comfortable, holding the public hearing for just the public hearing portion, not the action portion, at the December agenda for the planning board recommendation. Now, you wouldn't have to take action at that time. You could just hear out from the public, close the public hearing, and then come back in January for action. If you wanted to split it up that way, I don't think that there's any issue with closing the public hearing and continuing it to the next meeting for action. I know that there's usually some, wanting to keep the holidays kind of light kind of thing.
Are we ready to take it to a public hearing?
Well, that's
I'm not.
No.
That's right.
No, no.
Well, that was the point of,
Yeah.
laying out options. for
Sorry
you
to mess
guys.
up your
Yeah.
original plan.
Yeah.
but-
No, absolutely. And that's fine. That's why there's options. And I also want you to, if we've got pain points on things that are in here, so like, say we haven't, you hear from the public, there's still not a consensus on home occupations or something like that. You could adopt everything but the things that you're still worried about and continue on those things going forward. Other than that, other options would be including, I know, Terry, I know you had a bunch of notes that we probably haven't even got to yet. to some
Yeah, just
degree.
hand wrote them in.
So certainly, I'm personally comfortable, continuing conversation and things like that. But like I said, you don't really solve and decide any of this stuff until after the public hearing anyway. So I don't want you guys to think that, we have to have everything figured out before the public hearing. Because this is a recommendation that came from the planning board. I can't take your workshop, suggestions and edit it. You guys need to edit it at the adoption phase after the public hearing. But it is good to hear all this feedback and kind of know where some of those issues lie and to air it out so everybody has a chance to hear it too, and we can all be prepared for the public hearing and adoption phase. But so yeah, that's kind of what I want to lay out there. We could go ahead and proceed with the knowledge that if there's things that there's not consensus around an adoption, you can adopt everything but those things and hold those out for later. But I'm at y'all's pleasure.
So
Certainly.
what's going to be, what the public will see in the agenda for the public hearing is going to be strictly what you provided us, no changes to what came from the planning board?
I don't feel like I can edit what the planning board recommended post facto without sending it back to them for
These 11 points.
recommendation and, consideration.
And so one thing to consider too is you might end up having to have two public hearings, which
Yeah,
is
that's
fine. Because you might have the initial public hearing on the planning board recommendations, and then you have additional changes which might make certain things stricter. We would have to re-advertise and have another public hearing. But this is a huge topic, so
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't want you guys to ever feel like, just because we have a public hearing, you have to take action right then. I've been in 4 or 5 hour public hearings and they said, we're done. We're going to continue this to, 2 weeks from now so we can think about it. That's totally fine.
But you also want to think about where you want to get that public feedback As you're thinking about all this right now, it sounds like there's still a lot of what ifs. You might want your public input, so you can hear what your citizens think of it too, before you get too solidified.
Parking lot's pretty full.
It is-
So they're going to react, they would react to this document if we did
essentially,
the
yes.
public hearing in December. So this is, we roughly have a little less than 4 weeks. So to be able to get this document out, explain what it is that we're wanting them to do, maybe through the current, otherwise they wouldn't see it till the agenda.
Well, this document's been out. This is the same one that you had for your last workshop.
Okay.
So at least has been made publicly available. But to your point, they wouldn't
They
have
wouldn't know
known that
there's-
based on
yeah.
the public hearing coming up.
Yeah,
That was, the heavy lifting, Matt's gonna be on you.
I get it.
Really heavy lifting, right? Because, you've got to make this digestible so everybody can understand. And without having to go page by page, maybe you do,
Yeah, I mean, I
bullet
wouldn't-
point summary, executive summary. I mean, there's a lot on you to do.
Yeah, I would, yeah, you're
Sense of-
100%
be
right.
sensitive.
If you publish the
Self-
11 bullet points, if you publish the 11 bullet points prior to a community discussion, then at least everybody's zeroed in. They don't need to digest.
Well, no, they're gonna give you input on all of them. These are just the 11 that you 6 raised as, hey, I think this needs tweaking. There's hundreds in there.
Might be late for Christmas.
I think the most important thing that we can communicate with our citizens, if we're going to ask them for input, is for them to understand what this is, what the planning board has done. They're all familiar with the special use permits and the quasi-judicial hearings, and that they understand the supplemental regulations and what they're intended to do, because this isn't everyday lay stuff, and unless somebody tells you what it is and how it works,
Yeah.
we might not get any feedback.
Yeah, and, I do, for your public hearings, I will, I give you guys an executive summary, but I'll also have, a brief staff memo summary as well, which might break it down even more and include, some background information on why the planning board did it and what these things are intended to do.
Slides on the screen for everybody watching
Yeah.
it would be great.
Absolutely.
kind of defining, as Catherine, you began to lay out, were these phases. So there was the planning board phase, now that's, this phase reacting to the planning board, and then the public hearing. But does it make sense in the notion of multiple public hearings to, in December, do the definitions, and then in January, do the special regulations? So we at least get half of it done.
I would say the table of uses and definitions.
And definitions, yeah.
Do those together and could do supplemental regs.
And then do
separately.
supplemental regs, and that gives them more time to be thoughtful about that.
That's true.
And we would explain the whole process up front as part of that lead-in.
And they get their feet wet.
Yeah, they at least get into the document. That might be a way to proceed in a very digestible manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then we could even publicly present the supplemental regs at that point and say, but those aren't going to be discussed until later. So
That's
the
a good
public
idea.
would
Yeah, I mean,
see
you gotta
it, get
set
it
the-
presented, and have
That's
all
a
of
good
it
idea.
in front of
Have
them.
the
In
overview.
case they had something on their to talk about list and it's not talked about, they know at least that it's coming.
Yeah.
Right, give them
Yeah, so
plenty
we-
of leeway.
Publish everything, so it's all out there, like you guys are saying, and tag that first public hearing for comments and feedback on the table of uses and the definitions specifically, and then further looking at the supplemental regulations.
And just make sure the executive summary kind of includes the phases and, what this does.
And you can get that done a week before the town council meeting, so we can take a look at it.
I mean, that stuff would be published in the agenda like everything else, yes.
He's
So, I
saying
mean,
they'd give you a upfront look
Yeah.
in advance, but it would simply be everything here,
Mm-hmm.
plus anything that was definition or table of use related in your suggested changes.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, he could do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't need,
100%.
you don't need turkey
90%
2
of
weeks
it's
from
done
now.
in this.
Yeah, I mean, there's
I
only,
can do the explaining part.
there's really only 6
Yeah.
that y'all have discussed as controversial or additions
Yeah.
to what the planning board recommendations were, as far as definitions and table of uses. Those 6 that we talked about today, and didn't seem like those were very controversial.
That's not bad.
If you keep the supplemental regulations separate, we could go forward with that.
So where do these suggestions from Terry come back into play?
Second phase.
Okay.
It's got to go to the planning board, they got to start this whole process all over again. Here's some additional things we want them to look at. Sorry, I didn't mean to speak for you. Go
No,
ahead.
you're 100% right. Go for it,
And
Catherine.
expanding the list of prohibited uses is also in that same exercise. Which kind of, in an ideal world, right, we want to knock that out now before we start putting all these supplemental regs on something that very possibly could become prohibited in an ideal world.
I mean, you could
But we don't want to drag
prohibit it
this on
after,
any
but
longer.
that, yeah,
We just want
we can take care of that.
to get it.
Well, yeah, we're not going to get it 100% right the first time.
No.
But to your point, this phase 2, that's where I think that this document that Carrie produced would be
Yes.
really helpful, because you can go through each article in each section, and you can see what the concerns were from the planning board, and so that might help us, based on their concerns,
Yep.
to decide what's our
What's
next
the next
highest
thing?
priority.
Yeah.
This section has a lot of concerns, maybe they should work on that next.
Yeah.
This one only has one, and it's not so important.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to have to do this, is keep taking bites at the
Right,
elephant.
yeah, chunks at a time.
Yeah.
Matt, is it usual or unusual to not have anybody from the planning board present or present at the public hearing and be part of the process?
My other jobs, or my other positions as a planner, the planning board did not present anything at the elected body.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
It would be nice, though, if either the chair or the vice chair were in attendance, in case there's a question that Matt says, I'm not exactly sure what,
So no role as far as presenting, but the role would be potentially to answer questions should that.
Support.
if they will, yeah.
Well, this is what I would encourage, this interface that currently doesn't seem to exist between council and our committees and boards. So, things kind of happen in 2 different spheres. If we could bring everybody into the same universe, I think that would really help make the work of the town go much more smoothly.
Matt, one issue that one item I took issue with that I sent to you was the priority, the COGS priority number 4 was allowing update development review process to allow subdivision site plans approved by the UB administrator and or planning board. Is that going to be part of this process, or is that?
Well, no, these are recommendations of priorities. We're not going to take any of these forward without direction of council, majority of council to do something like that. I'm not going to really pick one of these up and say, hey, we're doing this, But I think that's, goes back to Terry's looking at these lists and figuring out what the next bite of the apple is.
But I'm glad you brought that up, Bob, because that might help frame this for some of the questions. Number 5 is what we're trying to achieve here.
Bingo.
Bingo.
Any other questions or comments for Matt?
I would just say, Matt, for me personally, your input on our next priority is important too, because you're boots on the ground, and so you know what things come in to
Yeah.
you that are problematic, and you might not have the right tools right now to deal
Yeah.
with. So if you have any suggestions,
Yeah,
I would
I'll give it
appreciate
some
that.
thought, absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you know the answers.
No, I don't.
We have the questions.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things, you know, that you think about, like, you know, I referenced the recommendation to look at parking in the CB, which I think is a good idea, but we've also got a streetscape project happening, you know, on the CB that would probably be informative as to how we regulate parking going forward. So there's some things that might be, you know, very worthwhile doing, but they're, you know, we can anticipate them going forward. But I'll give it some thought, you know, by the time we get this ball moving and have some input as well.
So may I recap and make sure I have clear direction and we have clear minutes? We are to proceed with the public hearing in December, but only for definitions and table of uses. We will present the supplemental regulations at that meeting, but that will not be the public hearing. It will be only on those two components. Is that, everybody's in agreement with that?
And if you, or when you present the supplemental regulations, if you could provide guidance for how they might conduct that review.
Yeah.
Right, so in layman's terms.
Sure, yeah.
Does this support your perception of the town you want Oak Island to be, or however you word that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than routine housekeeping and maybe some beach renourishment, we need to kind of back away from putting anything else on the December agenda.
Well, thank you. That rolls nicely into why I want to get this really clean, because the next 6 months you're going to be really busy with strategic planning, budgeting, your work sessions, all that coming forward. So I want to be respectful of your time and meetings. But if we have this part as the December public hearing, your vote on that component would be in January. But then if you need supplemental regulations, another work session, you'll see the calendar in just a few minutes, and keep that in mind and figure out where you want to slip that in, or you want to have another meeting. So if we're okay with that, I'm going to move to our final topic on the agenda, which is the upcoming budget process. I know, you're looking at me like, it's Catherine, it's November. Yes, I'm a planner too at heart, but my planning on the budget side is the strategic planning, which is budgeting. And if we start early enough and get your input and guidance on some clear direction, it will give you ultimately a much better budget in the end. Absent your clear goals and objectives for us, we will build you a budget on what we think is good from a staff perspective. So we would strongly encourage and want your guidance, your policy setting board. If we don't do a strategic plan, we'll do the best we can in the budget again. So I would love to.
I know that you sent an email saying that we give a lot of money to a bunch of different little organizations, and maybe we need to look at that a little closer going forward,
Outside agencies, okay.
outside agencies.
What I'm passing around right now is a calendar, and that is an item on the calendar, so I'll take your suggestions on that too. What I want to make sure we're okay with this calendar for the next 6-7 months. Get on your work session schedules and go ahead and discuss the January, what you have typically called a retreat, or work sessions as we're now calling them, on those Thursdays after the board meetings. That is scheduled for, find it on here, the retreat, January 16.
Of 25.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that one needs a 5 on it.
January, yeah, January.
I'm planning too early. I'm still in 24. Thank you. So I'm going to start earlier with the staff as well. Same thing, I've encouraged them to start their own goals and objectives planning, their strategies. And so they'll have early preparation of what they know their professional areas. They know what they need to be trying to achieve. but then they'll be better able to meld their budget requests to things they hear from you in your guidance on goals and strategies during that January 16th retreat. Of course, we'll do the mid-year financial presentation at that meeting as well. Then it moves into the rest of the budget calendar. This is pretty standard. The outside agencies are built in here. Instructions going out to the department directors in February. That's very consistent with the timeline we did last year. And they turn it back in, and we collate things during the month of March. And then your April gets really busy. That's what you've been used to in the past, the April work sessions. I wanted to go ahead and set those with you as early as possible so we don't have conflicts and
But
everybody's
the good
able
news
to
is we'll have the
participate.
UDO pretty much under control by April.
That would be great. Well, the land use plan update, you mean?
You guys.
You thinking the land use plan update from Withers?
Catherine, are there times, are we going to go with the 1 through 5 for planning purposes? For instance, the April workshops, how will we, in the past, they were in the morning. Does it matter to council one way or the other if we know this far in advance?
We'll say the 16th, we have a planning board meeting, the January date, so that would have to at least be an afternoon meeting.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The January 16th, we have a planning board meeting at 9, so we'll have to do at least a 1 o'clock meeting for that.
So we could be after.
Right, so that's a normal Thursday, yeah.
Thursday, 1 to 5, yeah. But to the mayor's question, does anybody have a preference on April mornings or afternoon work
Which
sessions?
do work.
Or working folks here?
I'll work.
So,
Well, you work too, don't you? I'm the only unemployed guy here. I need a job.
I mean, this year we did like 10 to 12 on those workshops. I was able to make that work in my schedule.
Mornings are better for you? Okay, is that better for you?
so what I was going to reiterate, when Bill and I met with you prior to the last council meeting, what we talked about was, this is your gig, right? So rather than continue to follow the same process that has been followed for years, and if you feel you would like to follow a different process, and rather than having 2, 4, 6 meetings that last anywhere between 2 and 3 hours, if you feel there's a better way to share that information, a more efficient way. I mean, you and I talked about where flipping through the pages and having the department managers, going to page 16, page 22. That's like supporting documentation. So focus on the bullet points, and we might be able to knock it down time-wise even more.
Short walk.
I love that, and I completely agree with you if council's all comfortable with that. I think that depends on how much of the strategic planning effort we actually get accomplished this year, so that we have goals and strategies, and then I can build those presentations at that higher level.
Made it very easy last time.
We're going to try to go one step better as well, if that's okay with everybody. I will always provide you every single number you want to see, back 5 years and variances and everything. But several council members have commented on that, and I certainly agree from larger towns. Council members don't get into line item budgeting. We're going to try to make this more strategic budgeting and goals and objectives and focusing on measures and what are we doing with the taxpayers' dollars and being very accountable and responsible next year for what we're allocated. And to tie it to what you want to see accomplished, not how much it costs for pens and papers.
That's,
So I will commit to that.
yeah, Catherine and I met on this, and that's the reason why for 2 years I've been asking for variances, because that's how I've always done government budgeting, is you establish a threshold on your variances. And let's say, for example, this year, the department head for public work comes back and they're gonna run a -1% or a +1% for this year's upcoming request. That threshold is so small, Why are we gonna sit here and go line item by line item through Public Works? There is absolutely zero need to do that. However, if there's some strategic item for Public Works, like I brought up this past workshop, moving Public Works out to the airport, step one was the fuel depot needed work anyway. Let's get that over to the airport as kind of step one. So if we have a strategic item for Public Works, we will talk about that. Otherwise, we skip Public Works in the budgeting. Its variance is not significant enough to impact the budget. And it's like Catherine said, I personally could care less how much pens and pencils and papers cost for Public Works. Or did they spend their money wisely? Good, let's move on, right? And so every department review becomes more like that instead of this line item review. But it starts with these variances. You won't know where the money's being spent until you see variances that fall outside of any threshold value that we establish. Now, that's the beauty of it. We get to establish that, right? So do we like, is 1%, can we sleep with that at night? Do we want to see the 2%ers or the 3%? You know, what number all of a sudden do we lose sleep at night, right? And
Depends
those,
on the-
that's where we come in, right, and look at what's going on. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
And that's why April's kind of broad, but I've grouped them up together. And if we don't need one of those, we can focus that day's work session on the other department. But I think, or I hope, that even with the goals and strategies that we set, we will want to talk to each department. I would
Oh,
think
yeah.
you would want to.
Oh, yeah.
But to your point, it won't be line item budget review.
Yeah. A general wish list and move on.
Or this is why we need extra money. The variance is going to be really high here, but here's why. Because you said in your goals, in your strategic plan, you want us to accomplish X, Y, Z. Well, here's what it will cost to accomplish X, Y, Z. And then you can say, oh, well, whoa, maybe that won't be our strong goal for this year. Maybe half of that goal, or we'll postpone that goal. And that's what the dialogue becomes instead of cost of pens and paper.
So the April dates, just real quick, I'm going to be in, my niece is getting married in April, and I'll be in California the 15th and the 17th of April. The other dates I'm fine with, but those dates, we can't.
What dates did you
Well,
have,
and
Catherine? You're grimacing.
Just FYI, April 10th is
Took me a
not
lot
a
of
Tuesday,
judging.
it's a Thursday.
Say that again.
April 10th is a Thursday in 2025.
I'm walking my dog.
Yeah.
Take my Tuesdays and Thursdays and
Yeah,
I'll
your
have those
Tuesdays and
corrected, so.
Thursdays kind of wandered a little bit on you. but-
Yeah, they should be.
Okay.
I have a steering committee April 9th.
April 10th, because April 8th is your council meeting, so obviously April 10th
Yes.
is okay. April 15th is a Tuesday and
Yeah.
Bob is out.
Right.
Following Thursday, and I tried to keep it Tuesdays and Thursdays, but
Right.
we can certainly adjust that. The 17th is the Thursday, Bob's also
I'm out that
out.
time.
Okay.
And the other dates I'm
And
fine
then
with.
Tuesday, April 22nd, and that is
Right, a
Thursday,
Tuesday.
April 24th.
Yep.
And if we need it, Tuesday, April 29th. Okay. Suggestions for the 15th and the 17th? That's that 1 week.
Are you gone all week, Bob?
I am.
Well, we could do the whole week of the 21st through the 25th. And
That's
just try
so
to
far-
do them
That's
all
so
in
far
1
out, I
week.
have nothing on my calendar.
That's why I'm trying to get on your
No, that's
calendar
okay.
now.
No, think about it now. I can do that.
The 21st through the 25th?
Yes.
Would
No
that
more?
be easier? Oh, no, that's too hard. Too hard to cram it all in 1 week.
That's way
Too
too
much.
much to ask for me to
Okay.
move my work schedule around. I can do that right now.
Do you think just adding an hour or two
But I can,
meetings before and after it might cover for those, or?
and depending on who's
I
up
do.
to bat, I mean, if I'm not here, I'm not here. I mean, budget workshops aren't mandatory, so I'm either here or I'm not here, so.
Well, if you get the material in far enough in
Right, if I get
advance,
the
you can
material,
provide
yeah,
input separately. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other ways to do this.
Yeah, I've gone through them enough that as long as I get my hands on the material, I can provide.
The
input.
feedback, yeah, because I've not been here for some.
And I think really, Catherine, it's just, as long as we have that summary, I mean, that's key rather than the line items. You know, that is really key. Variance report, summary, trend analysis, you know, whatever you have, that would be great.
All right, so the other item I wanted to discuss was at your retreat in January. I've seen this done a lot of different ways. Having this council be your first retreat type process, would you prefer some initial guidance on strategic planning and an overall discussion of what we're looking for? Would you be comfortable with a facilitated approach if I bring an outside person in here to help you move more targetedly through setting goals and objectives? What's your comfort level for that type of retreat or other retreat ideas? I have lots of them. I've seen a lot of great retreats, but I don't know what your comfort level
I
is.
think you can lead us.
I prefer a review from staff on the front end of like our capital projects. Because our capital projects tend to represent our strategic priorities. That's why they're capital projects. So I usually like to see an update on those. Where are we with capital projects? Are we on schedule, behind schedule, over budget, under budget, et cetera, et cetera?
I'd much rather you steer us and guide us
Right.
than somebody that doesn't know our story and doesn't know our capital expenditures.
Yes,
and
because if a
commitments.
capital project is one of our strategic priorities, guess what? We cover both topics. We're looking at the status of that capital project.
Yeah.
So then we don't come back 2 hours later and say, okay, remember what we gave you the status on this capital project? Now, here's the strategic priority that's driving that. Let's talk about that. Well, we just talked about them 2 hours apart. Let's talk about them all at the same time. So,
Well, and I hope there's going to be additional goals and objectives that come out of it that are
and
over and
then-
above
yeah,
capital
Then
projects.
after a capital projects review, we go into, okay, what's net new? What did we not talk about that's on our minds that we need to talk about? Because
What's
it may
unfinished?
lead to a new capital project.
Right, or other strategies and
Right.
goals. Like if we had a crime problem, and you
Right.
said, your goal is to get to a lower crime rate of an acceptable level of 5% serious crime. So you got that in depth, and reducing crime was your goal. May not have anything to do with capital projects, but very important for us to know where to put the money.
Well, the way I like that, so we, two different components, we look in the rearview mirror for capital projects, and then we look out the windshield for strategic planning. So we'll kind of maybe bifurcate that process. So then we can have some significant deliverables specifically on the windshield items, which will then become next year's rearview mirror.
So do the review first. It's usually a pretty in-depth where we are mid-year, financial review, capital projects review, status review, and then start the strategic planning process for the new year. Doing that in 2 hours on the front and 2 hours on the strategy will probably not get us a strategic plan by the end of that retreat. Unless you're comfortable with me taking a stab at providing you a draft. Sometimes it's easier, instead of starting from scratch, to start from a strategic plan that you can cross out and change. 20-some years of this and lots of different organizations, cities, counties, state, they almost all come back to very similar top 10 type goals and objectives.
I'd be happy to see a draft, because you've got eyes on things that we don't have eyes on.
Okay.
And so I would appreciate that.
Thank you. I didn't want to be presumptuous and say, here's one. Then you all say, no, that's not ours. I want it to be yours.
You've been around here long enough, right, as a town manager, at least also prior to, You've met with us collectively and individually, so you know some individual nuances and oddities, in my case at least. So I think you can, as you weave that into some of the strategy, I think that would really help, that would resonate with the group.
Well, you created last year's, backing into it. So
I did.
to be able to look at last year's and even see what's unfinished, right? So there might be things in that one that need to be carried over.
We were pretty broad in that one.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really, y'all spent the majority of your retreat last year talking about the
Line
town
item.
manager. So we didn't get as much strategic guidance out of that as we would hope this year.
I spent the
Okay.
retreat last year making sure Tammy had orange juice or water.
Oh, that's
or
right.
What else, did she need help going to the restroom?
Sure.
Do
Are
I
there
need
any
to
other
call the
things
nurse?
that you would like to see? I'm preparing now for that retreat for you.
Do you have a notion about what the time windows are going to be on these? Like how long the retreat will be? Is it, we said the afternoon because that's a planning board meeting.
At least 1 to 5.
Okay, and is that enough?
Probably not.
No, but I would really debate whether anything after 4 hours, you've got much of a brain left to think critically and other things pop in your head while you're showering the next morning that it's like, gee, I wish I would have said that, or gosh, I forgot about that.
So does it make sense then to go ahead and reserve another date like the following Tuesday in case we need to wrap up our discussion, and then if we don't need it, folks are free?
You're talking about in April?
January.
In January.
Does that make sense?
I'm
So
open
the
to anything,
Council
whatever.
meeting's on the 14th. This would be the 16th. So the following Tuesday, did you say?
Tuesday.
It could be the 21st.
I can do that.
And that way we don't get to the 16th and not be finished, and then everybody's calendars are packed and we can't find a date.
Yeah, 1 to 5 on the 21st.
And then on the budget, I know you've got a fairly short turnaround from when we finish until you present to council. Would it be possible to move one of those week of the 14th dates to May the 1st?
What month are you talking about?
Well, April 15th and 17th do not work for everybody. So I'm asking if we could at least move one of those to either Wednesday the 30th or Thursday the 1st, depending on whether Mark can schedule back-to-back days or not.
Well, if I'm the only one that can't be here, I'd be okay to follow up with what dates did you propose?
Either Wednesday the 30th or Thursday the 1st. It would just, May the 1st, it would push our process out 1 or 2 days.
I could do that. I could do that.
That's fine, I could do that.
April the 30th is what you're talking about? So
April
when do
30th
we
is a
expect to
Wednesday.
present the budget at a public hearing?
That's on the
June.
list here.
About June 10th.
Last 2 Wednesdays.
May 13th and June 10th. Now, last year we did the public hearing and the vote in May. We were actually a little ahead of schedule, so that gave us an opportunity, if there were any concerns, major things that came up, to adjust it before the June meeting, because by law you have to adopt it in June. So that's the only thing that usually keep as a possibility to tweak if it looks like it's going to be a contentious budget, or you think there might be any possibility that we can't come to an agreement on the budget before June, then we might want to move the public hearing to May. But that's, you play that out as you go forward.
Well, it's also where you want to, when we have the public hearing and the vote on the same day, it's as if we didn't hear the public.
The optics would look terrible on that.
Well, it's how we've done it
That's what
for
they've always
years.
do. But to your point, I like that as well, but that would push the public hearing in May 13th. And that would mean I would present to you and you'd have the public hearing, and that also doesn't give the public time
No, we'd
to
have to create
hear my
another date.
presentation.
I
Then
don't
I,
think we can do that anyway by statute.
yeah, then that would be, presenting it to you in April, and there's just no way. With these work sessions.
No, I think the budget presented to council needs to stay May 13th. The question is there a time frame between the 13th and the 10th where we could do the public hearing and then keep the vote on the 10th?
They have to do public hearing at the regular meeting. It
Mm-mm.
can be a special.
No,
Special meeting for
it can be a
public
special meeting.
So, and then the least favorable, but also an option, would be public hearing on June 10th and call a special meeting for the final vote. But then you're really cutting close to the
Yeah.
statutory line.
Yeah, I would rather get the vote as early as possible.
Okay.
I think it's uncomfortable running it to the end. It puts a lot of pressure on you.
Mhm.
Okay. We'll look at a public hearing in late May.
May, yeah, you need 2 weeks.
Should,
Yeah, we could do it on the 27th or June 3rd.
I think if, I only do this once a year, so.
Yeah.
remember. I think that we have to publish, well, we're required to publish the notice of the agenda, or the notice of the public hearing, at least 10 days before the hearing. And I think all the notice needs to say is that the proposed budget has been available. And we will publish that, put it online, the 14th if it's presented the 13th, so.
So if we wanted to keep to a Tuesday night, the 3rd, the 27th or the 3rd would work. Oh, no, it's business days, isn't it?
No,
No, calendar days. I mean, that's just my perception. Y'all may not agree with me, so,
no.
that we separate out the vote from the public hearing.
I think it should be separated. I think the optics are bad.
as we haven't had historically a lot of public comments, but it sends a signal that every comment we hear will absorb and consider, rather than discarding and voting right after that. So I like that idea.
So do we want to put a date on the calendar now?
May 27th? For special public hearing? Then
Everybody good with that?
if y'all had any changes, you just have to get it to me quick.
So that's a
Yeah,
6
okay.
PM, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's why I wanted to start in November. Make sure we think this through. Thank you for that.
So not to beat the horse, but if we're going to move one of the budget meetings the week of April the 14th to the end of April, which one are we going to move? Anybody have a,
Well, Bob said, and I think it puts the pressure on us getting the information in advance. So he has an opportunity to review it and ask questions of Catherine and Helen or whomever else needs to be in that discussion. And if he gets it, then he can get his information to us. We could keep the 15th and 17th.
Well, if at all possible, I prefer not. I'd prefer to be here.
Okay, all right.
You know, hearing things secondarily, and so questions are going to come up that if I'm not here, then
You can't weigh in on. I get it.
from that question. So if it's not too inconvenient.
So
But
which,
either the 30th or the 1st would work with me, or both would work.
Let's do the 30th, because that means I have 14 days to turn the budget around to present to you. So the
And so
sooner the
that's,
better.
the 30th is going to replace which date, the 15th or the 17th?
Preference?
look at what's on the right-hand side in terms of what we're covering.
Well, I can rearrange those groups,
Okay,
and
So
to somebody's point, Lisa's point, I can make the meetings a little bit longer as well.
I'll make a
sure-
suggestion that we take off the 17th and
Okay.
keep the 15th, because the 18th is Good Friday. It's Easter weekend. If folks are wanting to go out of town, they might want to go on Thursday.
Good
good
thinking.
suggestion,
Plus, we
thank
have a
you.
planning
Great.
board meeting on the 17th, so thank you very much.
Say what?
We
What?
already have a planning board meeting the 17th too, so if we could just have one meeting that day, that'd be awesome.
So we're saying the 30th. Is that, I hear
The
that correctly?
30th,
So we
remove the
have-
17th, add the 30th.
So we
So we're
have-
losing the 15th and the 17th.
No,
Yeah, we're losing
we're
the
losing the
17th.
17th.
We're just losing the 17th.
So we have April
One
10th,
instead of
April
two.
15th, April
Adding the
22nd,
30th.
April 24th, April 29th, and April 30th.
Okay, what I would like to propose is that we do something with the 15th as well.
Oh.
Again, not being part of, I'd like to be here if at all possible. If it's not too inconvenient, then messing up people's schedules.
Is that one that we could just roll, put another hour onto the other?
Or-
that are already scheduled?
Do a 9 to 12 or whatever. What do we historically?
We could do a lot more on the 10th. And if we're not going to go through every line item, some of these will be
Okay.
shrunk anyway. So you want to do that?
We may not need as much time as you think.
I'll
Yeah,
put,
last year we
I'll put
did-
more time on the 10th
Yeah.
We
and
did 9 to 1
eliminate
last
the
year.
15th.
9 to 12.
Last year, we did 9 to 1, or this previous April, we did 9 to 1.
12, yeah, I think there were 4 hours.
Yeah,
So we're
I-
doing morning meetings in April, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. It's easier for me to,
Lisa, you'll
I
tell me
agree.
what you.
Okay,
Yes,
Uh,
we'll get
I
this
don't
all
have a
finalized, redo
preference,
this
so-
document, and yes,
yep.
for sure.
my manager lives in California, so if
I will
if
leave
I
it.
do stuff in the morning,
My manager lives at my house.
You don't know.
he doesn't know.
Art, my manager lives at my house.
I know. It's either that or I end up having to take vacation, which I've done before too. Over the course of 3 years, you do what you gotta do, so.
All right, we have the 10th, 22nd, 24th, 29th, and 30th, 9 to
We
1.
may not even need the 30th.
Correct.
We can just make that a goal and try to, you know,
It's however many questions you all have.
because the 30th now is gonna be tough for me, but if I'm not here, I'm not, don't worry about it.
And I'm starting in November. I thought I was gonna get
But
on
if
that.
we front end the weight of our meetings, if we front load them,
Yeah,
then that makes it lighter on the back end and gives y'all more time.
And once again, any of those dates are fine with me.
But again, Kevin, go back to the, your strategic approach to things and the efficiencies you can gain by changing the format and the flow.
Gotcha.
No doubt that we'll knock this out. We may not even need that last day.
Perfect.
Any more discussion about the strategic budget and planning? We good? I just want to thank
Thank you.
Matt for all of your effort
Thanks for being flexible.
and appreciate your flexibility, and Catherine for helping us make sense of an otherwise challenging schedule. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the different process. I think this is the correct way to go.
Can we assume that prior to the retreat, the first retreat on the 16th, we'll get something about the retreat that'll tell us how we need to be thinking or what we need to be thinking about in advance, or?
I could get you a draft strategic plan, if you don't hold it against me. If you say this is a good framework
Yeah,
and we
that would be
can tweak
helpful.
from there, would that work?
And last year's.
You need to be thinking about goals that you have for the various departments or just the town as a whole.
Yeah, what is it you think the town needs as we move forward?
I will try to get that to you at least a week in advance if I can. Is that okay?
The way I look at that, Catherine, your job, again, being the strategic thing that you are, as far as departments are concerned, and the strategy for each department, that's yours. And I think that I'd like to spend more time with us looking at what's the right thing for the town from a strategic planning. You handle the departments, and we can be a lot more high level.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we just want to make sure the departments align to yours.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and they're already, Fire's already got his done. So they're plugging ahead. Some of them are waiting for my 101 class that I'm doing for them in December.
So we can see a draft tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Fire's, you can.
Lee will be happy to show it to you.
I think he eats,
He's very
lives,
proud
and
of
breathes it. Yeah.
Okay, you all will keep talking, so I'm gonna make a motion, we adjourn. Are
Is
you
there a
through?
second?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you,
Great. Good
everyone, for
meeting.
your time.
Thank you.
I have a 5 o'clock appointment.